This china hutch is one of my favorite thrift flips that we've ever done on this channel. Today we're taking a look back at 50 of my best thrift flips. I am so excited to share them with you. If you have a favorite, let me know in the comment section below. In the meantime, let's get started. Our first thrift flip was like a little mini dresser thing that I believe either sat on top of a buffet or on top of another dresser because it had the green felt lined bottoms, which either to me indicated a jewelry drawer or a silverware drawer. I'm thinking it's probably the latter, but I envisioned it as going on top of my dresser in my master bedroom. So it was $13.99. I thought that was a great price. So the first thing I did, I removed the sticker using a blow dryer, and then I took it out to my shop and removed all of the hardware, and then I sanded everything down really, really well because there's these little like round divots on the top and I didn't want to see those. Also, I removed the back plates on the drawer fronts. They also had additional holes to kind of hold the back plate in place, and I filled those in because I have a plan to use different back plates that match my existing dresser better. So I filled those in and sanded the drawer fronts down after it dried, obviously, and then I went ahead and primed the entire thing because I only had a limited amount of cabinet enamel from my dresser left over, so I wanted to make sure that everything was primed, that would adhere good and it would get good coverage. So after the primer had dried, I took out that paint and I applied 2 good coats and making sure to roll it on, and then we let that set up to dry. Now while that was drying, I went in and did the hardware. What I did is I got rid of the back plate that came with it just because it didn't match the style of the dresser that I was adding it to. I actually had in my stash these little round back plates that look a little bit like flowers. And look how close they are to mimicking this. So we just need to match the finish up. And then the key thing kind of is a similar shape to this. So I think we can really make it look like it's a part of this dresser. So super exciting. I didn't plan for that. I just happened to have them and it was just lucky. I don't know if it was like, I knew I was gonna use them someday. And then I also kept the existing kind of key pole that came with this little mini dresser thing. They did not match up with the hardware, so I needed to change the finish of it. So I took a spray paint of this bronzy color that I used on my curtain rings, but it wasn't quite burnished enough. So the bronzy color had a little metallic hit to it. It was that bronze color, very similar, but the ones on my existing dresser kind of have an aged antique patina, which kind of pulls a little bit of a flat black. What I did is I very lightly dusted some flat black spray paint over the top and got both sides and made sure that that had really good coverage and left that dry. Once everything was dry, I went about assembling it back together and I added the new back plate. I went with the vertical position and I really love how it turned out. It looks like it was always meant to be. What I also love about it is it hides more of that cord cover that I used, which was already kind of not super noticeable, but this really took up some height in between the top of my dresser and the bottom of my television. I was able to accessorize it a little bit, but this will give me a place to store my jewelry. I love the way this turned out. It looks super cute, like it was always meant to be, and it cost me all-inclusive, probably less than 15, 20 bucks, including all of the paint and supplies. So I love this little addition. So our next thrift flip though is gonna be on the table behind me, but you can't see it yet. I'll show you in just a second. But what it is I found this very country style bowl. It had apples on it and kind of like a checkered pattern. It was not my style at all, which there's nothing wrong with it, but I really wanted to see if I could give it an entirely different look. Now, all of these thrift flips are meant to be super simple, easy, anybody could do them. And this is just a complete shining example of the power of paint. So the first thing I did is I flipped it upside down and I sprayed the underside of the bowl in a flat black spray paint, a couple of coats. Let that dry. Then I flipped it over and made sure to get the inside of the bowl with the flat black spray paint, good coverage. And I probably did about 2 coats on each side just to make sure that it was really good and covered. Let that dry for many hours. Then I took some gold leaf rub and buff and I just rubbed it on the rim of the bowl to just elevate it and give it a little bit of visual interest. I think it really lifts the look and makes it look a lot more high-end. And that was it. Super simple, right? You can do this, I promise. And it really changed the look of this bowl. I called this project a little bit country, a little bit rock and roll. So it went from country to what I'm calling a little bit more rock and roll. And it was just a huge transformation with a little bit of paint. I threw in some faux artichokes and you can see it right here on the table behind me. It's gonna be really cute on my little breakfast nook table. I love the way this turned out. Super easy fixes for a huge transformation. And that's all you need sometimes, is taking something that is painted in a design that maybe doesn't make sense for you, but you like the shape and the size of something. A little bit of paint can change everything. And that is the case here. This next one was kind of a surprise favorite. I found this big platter that had a design on the bottom that was really, really neat. And then I found a random kind of ceramic pedestal bowl that was kind of a flat black paint. And I'm like, I do really like to take 2 items and attach them together and make something new with them. But before I did that, I wanted to try out something that I haven't yet, and that is gold leaf. I've never worked with it before. I don't know if it's just because it's kind of messy, but I felt like this was the perfect opportunity to give it a try. And so that's what I did, is I sprayed on some gold leafing glue and then I started sprinkling on this gold leaf. And now it was not like a sheet, it was like little dusting, and it was really messy. And I had a little plastic bag over my hand because I couldn't find my gloves. I think the idea is if you use your gloves, that would be better, but I didn't have that, so I just used a plastic bag. So there you go, that would work as well if you're in that situation. And I kind of pressed it in and kind of rubbed it all over, and we got really, really good coverage. Now there was still a little bit of light peeking through, and I didn't want that, so I took it out to the garage and sprayed on some of my 18 karat gold Krylon spray paint on the back to kind of fill in all of those holes and kind of add to the dimension. Then I wanted to make sure it was sealed, and so I took some gold leafing sealer and sprayed that on. Now, just as an FYI, that needs to have 12 hours to set up. I ended up having a little tiny boo-boo because I went to touch it a few hours later and it was still wet, and so I had to do a little touch up off camera. It was really dark at the time, but just know that going in, that if you use the gold leafing sealer, it does take 12 hours to cure. So there you go. You want to probably seal it really, really well. So I may go back in, I didn't do it yet, and do some Mod Podge on the outside, like the washable Mod Podge that they have, because I do want to be able to wash this, because I do think this would make a beautiful cake plate. But before we get to that, I need to tell you how we attach the base of this. So this was actually like a bowl, meant to be kind of like a pedestal bowl. I like to flip it over, and I cleaned off the sticker and everything else on it, and then I took some epoxy resin, and it's a kit that I get at the Dollar Tree. So then we squeeze out this epoxy kit, mix it together. You have about 5 minutes of work time before it becomes permanent, and I put that on the edge of the bottom of the pedestal bowl because we're going to be flipping it over, and put that on the underside center of our glass plate that we had gold leafed. Then I let that set up. I kind of very carefully flipped it over and let it finish setting up that way. And this tray was actually a surprise favorite. I really love the intricate design that the gold leafing provided, and then with the addition of the spray paint on the underside, it makes it look so expensive. From a thrift store glass plate and a simple pedestal black base, we have this very high-end looking cake plate or decor plate, depending on how you want to use it. I think this looks fantastic, and I hope it makes you look at the items at the thrift store in a whole new light. Next up, we have this green fluted vase pot thing. I saw it and I'm like, that is beautiful. And it was such a good price at $6. I did not love the color green. It just doesn't work in my decor. What we did first to it is very simple. Spray paint, and I used a flat white spray paint. On the inside I did a couple of coats, and the outside I did a couple of coats, and made sure it had really good coverage and make sure it really dries up nice. This looks to me more expensive in this flat white finish. It kind of echoes one that I kind of saw at Pottery Barn. It didn't have the fluting, but it was a similar shape of base, super expensive there. And then another one I saw that had the fluting but without the pedestal part that was like $130, super expensive look there. Ours was like $6 or $7, super cheap. And the funny thing is if you do like the white version, Walmart is selling this exact thing right now. Already white, but it's a little bit more than I paid, but then, you know, you don't have to do anything to it. But I think it looks so nice, so high end. I could see it turning into like a tabletop fireplace, kind of like I did in a previous episode, or being a beautiful statement piece. I love the way this looks. I do have plans in the future to build in some beautiful bookcases in my formal living room, and maybe even in my family room, that I could see this being a very beautiful statement piece. I definitely am keeping it. It's one of my favorite flips ever. So beautiful, and you don't even have to flip it. If you want to go get the one at Walmart, you can do that as well. But anyways, I love how this looks, and I hope you do too. This next thrift flip is actually gonna end up being a Pottery Barn dupe. So I found this shadow box, and it had good bones, and you know, it was a great price for being a shadow box. It had a burlap center, and then it had a door that opens and closes, but I wasn't a huge fan of the finish on the frame. But I recalled seeing this shadow box from Pottery Barn that had the palm leaves in it. The Pottery Barn one was $400. I mean, $399, but by the time you add taxes and if you need to ship it and all of that, it's gonna be over $400. That is super expensive, and mine, when all said and done, is between $10 and $12 out the door, maybe $15 if you're really pushing it. And we got the same look for a whole lot less. So I ran to Hobby Lobby and got a palm leaf. It was a little bit too wide for our box, so I just took some scissors and cut down the side so it would fit into our box a little bit better. And then I taped off the glass and everything for the shadow box portion, and then I sprayed everything out in a white spray paint. And I had to do a few coats of that, and then I let it fully dry. Then I took the palm leaf, and all I'm doing is, because I already have the burlap backing, so if you were repeating this look and you didn't have the burlap backing, you just want to cut out a piece of burlap and put that in the back. If you wanted to keep this look long term, I would definitely say glue the palm leaf into the back of the box. In my case, I actually have another idea that will be coming up. So I just took some of the pins that were already in the backing, and I just kind of pinned the palm leaf into place just for the purposes of this episode. And that's because I didn't want to keep it permanent, because I do have some other plans for this shadow box. So if you want another idea for this shadow box, stay tuned. When you're going thrifting, you can keep things in your mind that you've seen on some of these very expensive websites. Get that bougie look for less by thrifting items, and yeah, there you go. We are gonna redo an old thrift flip that I did probably last year, if I'm remembering correctly. And what it was is, it was originally, according to a lot of you, thank you, a hat stand. I didn't know if it was like a candlestick. A lot of you recognized what it was, and it was a hat stand. It had like a country design, and I ended up sanding it down, and then I primed it with a gray, and then I spray painted it in a white, and then I went about attaching a top. And what the top was actually just one of those rounds from Hobby Lobby, and then I added a little bit more stability by adding another piece of wood, and then we nailed that into place. And then I did an antiquing glaze on the top. I didn't do any kind of sealer or anything like that. And all in all, I believe it was under $20. The finish of it has always been a little bit too rustic for me. I mean, I liked it okay, and it was really cute, but I want to move it to my outdoor patio area. I think it's gonna look really, really nice out there. And now we're going to paint it in a black cabinet enamel so it will match better. You can either use tricorn black or caviar. Both of those are really good black colors, but I tend to do all caviar just to keep everything consistent. And I did 2 coats of that on the base, which was a much higher quality paint than I had originally used, and I used hardly any of it, and this is left over from another project. I let it dry in between doing the 2 coats. Once that was dry, I took some matte Mod Podge sealer and just put on a coat of that just to seal it out and make it look a little bit more polished, which it did. So that was it for that project. Super, super simple. Even repainting it, we still have under $25 into this project. And there are some out there that look very, very similar. I found this one on Wayfair. It's Kelly Clarkson. It's on sale right now for $190, and it's a very, very similar look. Now, I'm gonna admit that her wood topper looks more beautiful. It's like an oak and it's got more of a design to it. It's a very similar look. I actually like the base of mine a little bit better. For $25, you can't beat that. So you're getting like this designer look, but a whole lot less. I got a hanging basket. I picked this one up at Walmart. I removed the chains from it because we weren't gonna use it as a hanging basket. And then I took out the coconut liner, but we'll put it back in just a second. And then I took the lamp and started disassembling it. I cut off the cord and pulled that out. I opened up the bottom so that I could access what was underneath there and try to get things to move. And then I also unscrewed the light at the top, and then I got rid of all of the lamp insides. I did leave like the base pedestal of the lamp just because I think it could add some stability in the end. And then I took some Gorilla construction adhesive and put that on the outer rim, and then I set our little hanging basket on top. So then I took some press and seal saran wrap and I wrapped that around all of the areas that I didn't want to get paint on them. And then I also lined it with some painter's tape. And then I took some of that flat black spray paint and sprayed that ivory out to a black, which will make it match my kind of look that I'm going for a whole lot better. And then let that dry. Then I went back in and peeled it back, and of course there was some little bit of flaws. And so I started out by spraying some into a lid of the paint and taking like a foam brush, and it just wasn't fine enough. So I went back in and retaped a couple of the areas, took a piece of paper and just kind of went in and tried to spray in some of those cracks and crevices. To finish this off, I took the original coconut shell, made sure I found center, and I did a couple of snips in the coconut shell and made like a plus sign cut so that it can slip over that lamp base that's in there. And then I'm gonna fill it up with some garden soil, even though we end up planting some faux plants. I'm pretty good at designing flowers. I'm not good at things that are potted. So I'm gonna use some faux ferns here and fill that up. And then I thought it would be fun to put right in the center a little solar powered light. I just thought it would be really fun little addition, pay homage to the fact that it used to be a lamp. That was it. I love how this turns out. It's so cute. I love it. I wasn't really duping anything, but I thought it was really cute and a really fun thrift flip. So maybe it gives you an idea of something else you could do with a lot of those thrift store lamps. All the thrift stores have tons of lamps, it seems like. Our next thrift flip, I wanted to recreate this Pottery Barn metal urn. It kind of looks like cast iron to me. It's very, very expensive. I believe it's $280. I knew that I would never spend that, but I really thought it was cool looking. So I found that tin metal container at the thrift store for $4.99. Then I originally found like a taller candlestick base that I was gonna use for about $2. I didn't end up using that because on the second shopping trip that I did, I found that other one for 75 cents and it looked a little closer to our inspiration one. It was a little bit lower. So the first thing I did is I took some Gorilla construction adhesive and put that to attach to our metal can. You're gonna let that dry. I think I would use liquid nails going forward. This construction adhesive, I think, needs a little bit more time to cure, and I'm impatient. So I immediately started on it, even though it wasn't fully cured. So then to kind of act as a primer and get the inside and have an outside kind of primed, I took the same flat black spray paint that we've been using, sprayed the inside, sprayed the outside, let that dry, and that was our primer. Then I brought it back in here, and then I mixed mostly black chalk paint, but I added a little elephant gray and truffle brown to it and mixed that in. And then I also tossed some sand into the mixture to kind of give it like a rough texture. And I just stippled that on the outside, and I kind of just pounced it on everywhere and made sure that there was sand grit in all of it. I was hoping the sand was a little bit finer. It ended up being a little grainier than I wanted. So once that dried, I sanded it down, and then I wanted to really try to get like a cast iron effect. So I took some of this joint compound and rubbed that on the sides and kind of gave it some good texture there. Let that dry. It didn't take very long. It dried rather quickly, especially under my little ceiling fan here. Then I went back in and used the same kind of paint and painted over the top of that once again. I didn't cover like all of it like really good because I kind of wanted a little bit of that white to show through. So I kind of stippled it on like that again. Now, one thing you could do when it is all dry is go in and sand it down a little bit more just to give some of that similar patina that the inspiration piece had. And then I just threw in some hydrangeas. I had these big bushes of hydrangeas. I think it looks stunning. I had originally planned to have this outside as something outdoors that I could put flowers in or decorative piece, but I think it's gonna look really nice in my dining room. And I've got some dining room work that will be coming up here soon. So you'll have to stay tuned to see which way I go, whether I stick with this black face or if I go with the gold one. I keep going back and forth, but either way, it really is gonna have a wow factor, and I'm so excited about that. We are going to try to emulate a Ballard design lantern for the outdoors, and this one I found retailed for $175, and I believe that one is on sale. I think it originally was $220. I wanted to see if we could get that look for a lot less, and I found this aqua colored one that had these like palm leaves on the side, and it was really disgusting if you remember. I wanted to see if we could do something with it. Obviously, I started out by taking out all of the glass. I didn't want to damage it, and then I took the lantern out into my shop and I took some tin snips and cut it down and kind of had to go back and forth because it was kind of attached to the outside. I think I regret not getting the other one that I saw in the thrift store, but it is what it is. I wanted to do a drastic makeover, and here we go. Then I took some rough sandpaper and kind of sanded out some of those harsh edges from using the tin snips, and I sanded on the outside. I sanded the ledges as best I could. I don't think they're like super perfect. There was a little bit of damage from clipping out those palm leaves. In the end, I promise you it's gonna look really good. And then what I did is I started out with some satin black spray paint, and I did a coat of that. And then after it dried, it was a little too shiny, so I went back in with a flat black spray paint, and that was just way better. I should have gone with that the whole time. And then while that was drying, I came inside and I designed like a little mullion. It was essentially the same type of design that I saw on our inspiration piece, and I knew that the best way to do that was cutting out like a vinyl decal, and so that's what I did. And so I used a permanent decal, and it was kind of a flat finish too, not a shiny black, and I cut that design. Once it was done, I weeded all the excess, and then I put down some transfer tape. Then I cleaned the glass panels off because they were very disgusting, and let them dry. And then we applied our vinyl decal directly to the outside of the glass. Then I put those back into the lantern one panel at a time, and there was little tabs that flipped down to hold it into place. And then I also cleaned up the little nasty like flicker candle that came with it and changed out the batteries, and it ended up working. So I didn't even have to get one of those flicker candles, and they are super realistic. So I was really excited that that worked, and that saved me some money. So in the end, I believe I spent $6.99 on that lantern, and then plus a little vinyl. All said and done, we have a massive savings over the $175 Ballard design one, but a really close looking dupe. It's obviously the top part's a little bit different, but it's very similar look for a tiny fraction of the cost, less than 10 bucks total on everything on that. And on the other one, it was like $175, not including a candle. So I love that. Thrift store for the win. I was looking for something that emulated this beautiful one that I found on Ethan Allen that was very expensive, close to $7,000, which is totally out of the budget. I'm not spending $7,000 on a China hutch. That would be a little painful. So what I've decided to do is try to find one through thrifting. What a score was this. 80 bucks at the Goodwill Superstore in Lakeland. It's very little is that you go right into a thrift store and find the perfect thing on the first try. The one thing about this China hutch is it didn't come with shelves. I've got an easy fix for that, so we're gonna solve that. And then also it's missing a couple of pieces of hardware, so I've ordered some new stuff, but we will get this looking brand spanking new. And even though we're gonna have to invest a little bit more money into it, it will still be just an awesome deal. I'm really excited about it. The grid is a little bit different than the Ethan Allen one, but the overall like look and feel of it is very close. And I think with the paint job, we will get it even closer. And we are gonna tackle it by first giving it a good scrub down. That was super dirty. That took me about an hour to clean it very thoroughly. I used a mixture of soap and water and a little bit of vinegar, and then I cleaned all of the glass. I just wanted to make sure it was super clean before we painted it. You gotta do what you gotta do. Now there's a couple of little repairs that we're gonna make. It's missing some moldings in a couple of places. I couldn't match it up exactly, but we're gonna do the best we can, and I honestly don't think you'll notice in the end. I popped off this piece from that side, and the reason I did that is because we're missing a piece on this side, and this is the dominant side. So we're gonna make sure all of those match. I'm gonna just hot glue this into place kind of on either side because I don't want it to be permanent in case we take this to another home someday and the dominant side is this, then I'll just kind of flip-flop them, if that makes sense. And then I don't know if you can notice right here, but there's a little piece of trim missing there. And we are going to use some of that same molding and patch that up. So hopefully you can't tell once it's all painted up. It's that time. We're gonna start on the inside. Let's paint. How much brighter is this looking? I am loving it so far, and it's just the primer. So while the primer is drying, we are gonna be working on the shelves. As I mentioned that it didn't come with shelves, so I've got a little fix for you. I'm holding the DIY dolly because it involves an iron, and she is terrified of iron. So if you hear her bark in the background, that is why. So what we've got going here is I picked up she really does not like irons. All right, so we've got some plywood that I had cut down at the home improvement store just to make it easier on me. I do have a table saw, but it's a 1/2 inch thick, and you can see that it has kind of this ugly edging. So we're gonna fix that right now. So I've never done this before, but we're gonna do it together. What we're gonna do is we're gonna put some edge banding on these shelves on the front, and you can actually see that it's gonna be too thick. And so we're gonna just iron this on, and then I have a special trimmer that will trim it off when it's nice and cool. For the exterior, I just paint that in a satin black cabinet enamel. It goes on looking gray, but it definitely deepens up as it dries. It's been a long day. I've been working on this piece for about 10 hours so far, and it's not quite done. and it actually looks a little like a hot mess right now. I've got paint all over the glass. I intentionally did that because I know I can go back in and kind of just scrape it off with a blade. There might be just a couple of areas that I want to touch up tomorrow. So it's the next morning and I'm really happy with the finish of the hutch. What we're going to do is scrape it all clean, get the edges cleaned up. We're going to install the shelves. I'm excited with how it's turning out. Let's finish it up. To finish out our hutch, I attached all the hardware. Some of it's the original, some of it's the old. Since it was mix and match, it didn't all quite match exactly correct. So I took some gold leaf rub and buff and kind of touched up all of the hardware, especially where we had maybe gotten some paint on it. I ended up getting a little bit of gold leaf on the cabinet, which I touched up, painted that. So in the end, the China hutch took about 3 times as long as I thought it would. I'm constantly doing that. I'm miscalculating how long it's actually gonna take. But in the end, I absolutely am thrilled with how it looks. It really echoes the one of Ethan Allen without the hefty price tag. I have about $150 into this, all said, paint, hardware, supplies, all of that, and I'm thrilled. My inspiration for this is definitely pots and things that we see off of Pottery Barn and a lot of the other high-end designer websites. What we're gonna do is we took 2 vases that were a little dated or not my taste, and then we are gonna just cover up their designs with some high gloss white spray paint. Now I ended up doing 3 coats of this and making sure there was plenty of drying time in between. And then after they were fully dry, I took them up into my studio, and then we took some mineral chalk paint and then we just did 3 coats of that around the bottom to kind of mimic that rustic look that you're seeing on those websites. And it looks kind of like pottery, like unfinished pottery. And I didn't tape that off at all because I wanted it to kind of look more natural. And I love the way this turned out. It was super affordable to do, to get that high-end designer look very simply. It was so easy. And so what do you think of this project? We are going to be doing this nightstand that I got almost a year ago. This has just been sitting, being very patient, waiting for me to do something. Now I know this first flip is going to offend some of you, especially the wood purists out there. I apologize. Yes, we are going to be putting some paint on this wood. In my humble opinion, it's a little bit dated. This actually I think was a nightstand from an old Disney World resort. It's Thomasville. It's a very beautiful, very well built, love it. It's just got a little bit of a dated finish, and so we're gonna update it a little bit. The first thing we need to do is remove that back shield on the back of the wall. I just don't like it, and the other one that I got didn't have it to begin with, so in order to make them match, we're gonna remove this one. And then we're gonna be doing a black color wash. This ended up being a little bit more opaque in the end than I intended. When you typically do a color wash, you want a little bit of the wood to show through. Some of it did end up showing through, but not quite as much as I initially had planned, but I love how it turned out. Let me just preface that. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna take 3/4 of black chalk paint to 1/4 water, stir it all up, put it in a jar, and then just go to town, painting the whole thing. And then you have a wet washcloth handy where you can like wipe some of it off if you feel like it's getting too heavy, and then kind of feather it out. After the initial paint dried, I did 2 coats of a matte spray-on sealer, and I do think chalk paint on furniture absolutely needs to be sealed. I like to use that spray-on sealer, and this is a matte finish. Even though it's a matte finish, it does give it kind of a pretty sheen, and then we let that dry. And so everything is black, the hardware, everything It's super sexy. I love the way this turned out. It kind of gets me motivated to finish that guest bedroom where it's sitting. So maybe that will give me a kick in the pants to finish that up, and I am super excited about it. My next thrift flip is this beautiful wood bowl that's kind of a little bit tired looking. And I thought that it was super cute. It had a really great shape, but it just needed a little extra love, but not much. So all I decided to do here is I kind of taped off that bottom rim of the wood bowl, and I decided to kind of make it look metal, gold in particular, and I just used some rub and buff 2 coats on the bottom here, and I actually did the entire bottom, and you'll see why in just a second, because I could have just left that alone and just did the rim and let that dry. And then I took some antiquing glaze that I had on hand and just did a coat of that all the way around and kind of wiped it on really nice. You could use Old English and all of that. If you're going to be using it for food, at least on the inside, I would probably just use some coconut oil or something for the inside where the food's going to touch. But I'm going to be using this for decorative purposes, so it didn't really matter too much. And that's it for this thrift flip. Super easy, right? Well, the reason I did the bottom is you can see here, I wanted to show you this one first, is it's really fun to kind of flip some bowls over sometimes and use them as a pedestal base. You can put a beautiful clear platter on it and use it as a place to display cupcakes or whatnot. I didn't show you this here, but you could also use it as a drink dispenser base, which would be super cute. And so there's a lot of options, but for the most part, I'm gonna have it flipped over and use it kind of as a bowl as it was intended for decorative purposes. And I just thrown in some decorative green orbs. I think it's really cute. I can switch this out seasonally. At Christmas time, put in some nice potpourri and things like that, and just kind of switch it out maybe a little bit with the seasons. But wood bowls are really on trend. I really love this, and I love that just little extra metallic finish on the bottom. I love this thrift flip, but what do you think? I actually found this beautiful candlestick, glass candlestick, at a thrift store when we visited Idaho last summer. And I wrapped it up and carried it home in my suitcase. And my husband's like, what are you doing? You're thrifting in Idaho? Well, I thought it was beautiful, and it was $3. And I knew that if I found the right glass jar, that would make a beautiful piece together. And that's all we're going to do. This one is so simple. So I found this canister. I actually got it at Hobby Lobby, but you can find lots of canisters at thrift stores, so keep your eye open for that. And all we did is I took this $1 epoxy kit that I got at Dollar Tree, squeezed it together, stirred it up, and then just kind of wiped it around the rim of that candlestick and set our canister on top, and then let it dry for 12 hours. That was it for the thrift flip. And you take 2 kind of ordinary, I mean, the candlestick wasn't very ordinary, it was pretty cool, but you take 2 relatively ordinary things, epoxy them together, and you have one new awesome extraordinary piece that I can use in my bathroom and put all of my Epsom salts in, and it makes a beautiful display. And just think about all the glass items that you can get at a thrift store and what you can do if you combine 2 ordinary things together. So I love this. It was super easy to do and just opens a whole bunch of possibilities. So what do you think of that? I wasn't a huge fan of the base of this. I just felt like it was black, but it had like some brushed on gold that looked like it had been hand done. So the first thing I did is kind of tape everything I could off, take it outside, and sprayed on a flat black spray paint, gave it a nice blank slate. So after that was dry, I came in, added a new shade. Well, it was new, but it was thrifted. I thrifted this shade about a year or 2 ago, and it's just been sitting in a closet for $4. It looked perfect on this lamp. So if you're looking for more of like a regular lamp, floor lamp, this one looks really good, don't you think? I thought this was spectacular, but when I saw this floor lamp, I could not get out of my mind a street lamp. And that's kind of like a running theme on my channel. I have done a lot of street lamp DIYs, but I've never done a legit street lamp. Remove that shade that we just put on and totally disassemble the top portion of the lamp. Take off the harp, unscrew the nut, get everything kind of disassembled on that top portion. We even cut the light bulb section off with some wire cutters and just clip the cord. And I know that that is going to seem scary and crazy to some of you, and I've actually never done this, but it turned out to be way easier than I thought. And then I reassembled it without the harp and all of that, the light fixture, and I kind of tried it on, and it was still going to be too tall. The little rod was going to stick out too much, and it was going to not work for our official street lamp. So what I did is disassembled, took out that pipe that runs in the middle that holds the wire in it, pulled it all out, and I needed to cut out a 1.5 inch section of that pipe. I couldn't do it right off the top because I needed the threads for the nut to kind of hold everything all together. So my thought was, I just got some pipe cutter. It's a little tool that I had in my arsenal that my husband uses and I use, and all you do is you attach it to the rod, kind of line it up with like a little blade, and you tighten it, and you keep spinning it around and around and around and around and around, and tightening it a little bit at a time. As it gets a little bit looser, you tighten it a little bit until ultimately the pipe cuts. And I had to do that twice to get out that 1.5 inch section. And then to reattach it, I didn't want to go to the home improvement store and get a flange. I didn't want to get pipe fitting stuff and go to all of that trouble. That honestly is probably the proper way to do it, or getting a new rod altogether. So I cheated and I got a little Gorilla duct tape. I thought it would work out fine for what we were doing. Basically, I figured once we tightened up that nut, it would give it enough pressure that it would be okay. So I threaded the wire back through that rod, twisted it back into place, got our nut back on the top, twisted it really tight, and got it back to new. Make sure that the wire is sticking out that rod, and we don't want it to pull back down because, you know, if you yank on that cord, there's nothing really holding it into place. So I found a tutorial by my good friend Leah from CJ Drill. We're real life friends. She's amazing and she is so full of knowledge, and she taught me how to do an underwriter's knot. I think that's what it's called. So I followed her tutorial of how to make that knot, and I will link it in the description box below. And the idea of doing this knot is really important because that will prevent it. If somebody like yanked on the cord, it won't like yank our wire back through that rod and cause us issues down the road. So doing that knot is really important. With that knot in place, we are now ready to hardwire a lamp post top to the top of our new floor lamp. You just match up the wires, twist them together. I'm not an electrician, so I don't want to give you too much tutorial on this. It did work out fantastically. You screw it together, and then you take electrical tape and tape over the top of them. There was a ground wire that I also put a cap on and put some electrical tape around all of those, just securing them together. And then with it hardwired, you slip the top of that post cap right over the top of our floor lamp base, and it just so happened that it was the right thickness, the right size. It couldn't have been more perfect. I ordered this lamp post top off of Amazon for, I believe it was $39, and then all I did was tighten up the screws on the side of the post cap, and that just kind of clenches it right into our floor lamp base. And then I took a candle light bulb, screwed that in, and then put on our top. Now, if you remember, we clipped off our light kit on the top, and that's usually how you turn a light like this on and off. And so you might be asking yourself, am I going to have to unplug it and replug it in every time I want to turn it on and off? And my solution for this is the same solution that I have for some wall sconces I have on my wall that are not hardwired in. And I have found these plug-ins that are remote control operated. I just plugged it into that, and you can just turn it on and off with a remote control. And so therefore, once it's plugged in, we don't have to worry about it. But oh my word, this might be one of my favorite thrift flips of all time because it is so cool. It is a legit street lamp. Now it's not super tall, but it is a really cute size. I might take this outside. I may leave it right where it's at. I think it is so adorable, and the base of it really looked like a street lamp, and now the top matches the base. The finishes matched up. I'm thrilled to say the least, and I think I have maybe $60 into this lamp all said and done, only because the lamp was about $20 to begin with. And then of course we spent about $39 or so on that topper. I don't know, which version did you like better, the traditional floor lamp or this street lamp version? I'm just gonna say hands down, street lamp wins for me, but the other one looked really good too. So next up I found this, I don't know what it is. It's like a wood spindle. I don't know if it was attached to a bed or what it was attached to at one point. It was attached to something because it had these big giant holes on the side, but it was only $1.50, and I thought I could make something really cool out of this. So the first thing we did is took it outside and cut down the bottom of it to be a little bit shorter and get rid of those little random, I don't know, pieces of wood at the bottom and give us a nice flush bottom. And then I also had some scrap wood left over from another project where I cut down to cover up those giant holes on the side because I didn't want to fill it with like a ton of putty. I just thought that would take forever to dry, then it would cave in, it would just be kind of a hassle, and I just thought there would be a better way. And it just so happened that the wood trim that I had already had some pre-drilled holes in it. I thought that would work out good. I wouldn't recommend it. If you find yourself in this situation, just go with a solid piece of wood. It will be a little bit easier when you get to that point. I also cut down a couple of strips of wood to kind of match it all the way around where we were going to be attaching that to kind of give it a decorative element. Then I pulled out my nail gun and my wood glue, and we wood glued the pieces with the holes on first, and then we took some finish nails and nailed that in to cover up those giant holes. I did that on both sides, and then on the front and the back I just took a couple of pieces of the same trim without a hole in it and wood glued and nailed that into place. I did the base, I kind of crisscrossed, found center, kind of traced out where we wanted our spindle to sit on our base, glued it on, and nailed that into place. And then after the fact, it was a rectangle base. I meant to run it in the other direction, but once it was on, I was like, oh, you know, it's not a big deal really. So I just left it as is. And then I used a 3/4 inch wood boring bit to make that hole larger. And honestly, this would have worked out better if there was no hole to begin with. So my idea of it working out good, it just wasn't a good idea. Just start with a solid piece of wood because it was really hard to kind of match that center up and get that to be the size of hole that we needed it to be. If we would have just started with a fresh piece of wood, it would have worked out a little bit better, but we did get the job done and made our hole large enough for our wood dowel. So I had this 3/4 inch wood dowel sitting in my stash, cut it in half, and then we took some wood glue and glued that on either end and shoved it into our holes. And then while I was gluing everything, I just kind of filled in all these cracks and crevices just to make the paint adhere better and just kind of fill some of those gaps in. And I went kind of crazy. Once we had those dowels sticking in the side, I hot glued with some Gorilla hot glue, which is really strong stuff, some little wood finials to the end of each one of those dowels to just finish it off. After we attached the wood finials, I also attached a hook on the front and the back. This is a jewelry holder, so it will be a good place to hang some jewelry and maybe other decorative elements. And then I painted out everything that was raw wood in a brown finish to kind of just make it all match and keep it consistent, and you'll see why that's important in just a second. And then after that was dry, I did several coats of white chalk paint and got a nice opaque white finish and let that dry. And then once that was fully dry, I kind of distressed everything out, and that was the reason I did the brown, is just so that when I distressed it, it would be consistent underneath. And that's it. I put a little decorative mini wreath on it just to kind of add a little personality. But we can hang necklaces on it. We can hang bracelets on it. It's got a lot of possibilities. I think it looks really cute out on my fireplace mantle with some of my other elements here in my bedroom. And it's just a really cute piece. All said and done, I probably have $5 into it, and I just love how it turned out. It's a really cute jewelry organizer. So my next piece is this kind of swamp thing decorative box. I could tell that it had really good bones, but I was not digging this like swamp thing monster painted finish on it, but I knew that it had potential. And the very first thing I did is take this sage chalk paint. Now, when I say sage, I usually think of green, but this is definitely kind of like a bluish green. And I did 2 really good coats on the entire thing, except for the inside, because the inside was a really pretty gold color, and I left that alone. And you'll see why that gold will work really well in our finished piece, because once those couple coats of blue-green was dried, I went back in with some Grecian gold rub and buff with my finger and just very lightly dusted over some of those decorative elements on the box. I had some like fleur-de-lis kind of feeling to it, and I just very lightly hit that, and on the finial on the top I did a little bit, just very delicately, and it totally transformed this box into something that was very kind of dated, to say the least, and kind of swampy looking, to a very beautiful French feeling decorative box that's going to look fabulous in my living room. I think that it turned out so cute. It looks so high-end, and I'm kind of partial to it. Now, one of the things that I love to do when I'm thrifting is try to dupe high-end items, and lamps are super easy to do this too. So if you pop on over to the Pottery Barn website, you will see a ton of lamps like these, and they range from anywhere from like $300 to $350. They're really expensive. Now, you can find similar shapes and ideas in very dated color palettes at the thrift store, but that is one of the simplest things you can do to change a thrifted item. So I sifted through all of the lamps, and I like to check them almost every time I go thrifting, and I found one that I thought really mimicked the look of the Pottery Barn one, albeit in a very dated palette. So all I did was took it home and taped everything off that I didn't want to be painted, and I spray painted the entire thing in a matte black spray paint. I feel like this is a really quick and easy way to get this look going because it gets in all of those little nicks and crannies. This one had a whole bunch of texture on it, which is perfect because that really emulates the ones that we were seeing at Pottery Barn. And then we let that fully dry. And then what I did is I went back in and I watered down some mineral gray chalk paint, which you'll see me use again in this episode. Rather than doing white, I felt like the more muted tones of the gray would be a good way to go. And so I just wiped that all over the lamp and really tried to get in those little ribbed lines on it. Now, in the end, it ended up looking a little lighter and grayer than our inspiration one, which you'll see in just a second here. I thought about going back in and doing a little bit of black over the top again to kind of soften it a little bit, but ultimately I felt like it really matched some of the other stuff going on in pottery that I had. I am just really happy with how this turned out. I feel like with a fresh shade on it, it looks so similar to the Pottery Barn one, and in the end, with a fresh brand new shade and a little bit of paint, I think I have about $25 into mine, and the Pottery Barn one again was around $300, so that is like 10% of the cost. And I have a really cool looking lamp that looks like I could have gotten it at Pottery Barn, but I didn't. So don't discount the lamps when you are on your thrifting adventures, especially if the colors aren't working work, that is a quick and easy fix. For a long time, I have been wanting to do some large scale, huge candlesticks out of some kind of spindle. This is simple. We're gonna pop on outside and make some of these cuts. So the first thing we're gonna do is cut off this long, bulky part of this. I think we'll just leave like maybe 2 inches of that. We don't need to measure anything. We can totally eyeball this. And that looks about good. And so we'll make a cut. Perfect. Okay. Now we've just got to decide here. And I'm thinking, I'm gonna split this, but I want this one to be the taller side. And this is gonna be the shorter one. So I'm kind of thinking like right there near the knot. So this is our first tall, chunky candlestick, loving that. And then we are gonna just cut a little bit off the bottom of this. In fact, I might use this as a guide to kind of get the same amount. So from this point, what I did is I took some pre-made wood squares and circles that I pick up at Hobby Lobby. So I think I took like a 5-inch square pre-made piece, and then I also took, I think it's like a 4-inch round, and I took a little wood glue and put that on the bottom, and then I took my nail gun and shot in several nails on the bottom, and then I repeated this process and did the circular one on the top where it was rounded, so it kind of matched up. And then I filled in the nail holes with a little wood putty and then let that dry. At this point, I went in with my sander and sanded down that pesky marker that they wrote on, and it did. It took off some of that aged patina, and then I sanded down any rough edges and so the excess of the putty, so it was all nice and clean. And then again, I pulled out that same mineral chalk paint, mixed it with some water, and started kind of just doing like a gray wash over this raw unfinished wood. And I did that to one of them, and then the sun kind of set. And then I looked at it the next day, and I could tell that the top and bottom pieces, the new pieces, didn't match up the pillar that was older. I came up with a fix for this. So I got a little bit more water, and then I did a little tiny squeeze of gray paint, a little tiny squeeze of brown paint, and a little tiny squeeze of yellow paint to kind of mimic the tone of what I felt was on the wood, because you didn't want it to be too brown. There was definitely yellowing in it, and it had some gray aspects to it too. So what I did is I did the fresh pieces in that color wash and the bottom pieces in that color wash, and then anywhere I had sanded, I kind of touched up that area. Then I let that dry, and then I proceeded to go back in and do that same grayed out color wash on the entirety of the candlestick. And then I was able to go back and kind of color correct the top and bottom pieces of the one that I had already done. And then I was left with these really cool candlesticks that you can see back here. I love them. I think they are so cool. I don't think this is the right spot for them. They're not scale-wise proportional, but that's where I put them for now. We were able to get 2 very large scale pillar candlesticks out of that $35 pillar, which I honestly thought was a little bit high, but it was really cool, and it was something that I really wanted to do. And then a couple of those wood rounds. I love how this turned out. It ended up being super simple to do, but with a really cool impact. Many of you made the great suggestion to put on a slightly larger round circle on top. I got these huge chunky candles after I had already made it, and they looked really big for the top of that. So I went ahead while we were working on this project and added a little bit of glue and some nails and a new topper, and it looks so much better. So I mean, I knew it had to be done, and thanks for giving me that extra little nudge to do it, because I am so much happier with these. Gold frames right now are all the rage, especially with like that kind of cool antique vibe. And I found one that used to be gold, but had been painted kind of haphazardly in a white chalk paint. So I decided I needed to turn the white one back into gold. So all I did on this is I first started out with this new gold spray paint. It was like the Color Shop, and it was so yellow. And so I just took that as like the opportunity to use it as a primer, I guess. And then I went in with my tried and true 18 karat gold by Krylon spray paint. It's my favorite gold spray paint color. It's a beautiful color. And so I went in with that, but with an antique frame, a lot of time that there's like added dimension. So I went back in with a couple of different rub and buffs, and I kind of tapped in some other colors of the gold very carefully to add some of that dimension. And what I did is I printed out some digital prints from Etsy. I love to go to Etsy and find some really inexpensive, beautiful artwork. Just have it printed out at Walgreens, and then you can put in the frame. Now, my white frame didn't come with any glass, so all I did was I borrowed or stole the glass from a Dollar Tree one and the backing of that one. So I just took some duct tape and duct taped it all into place on the back, rather than going to the effort to cutting down glass and all of that. It worked out just fine. You wouldn't be able to tell unless you flipped it over. I know it's a little janky, but honestly, for something that you're not going to look at, it was fine, and I'm okay with it on this instance. And then I also printed out some different artwork for the one we didn't really have to do anything to other than just do a little cleanup on. That was the $2.50 one that was already gold. Loved it. It was so cute. I just printed out another piece of digital art, and I paired it with this pot of peonies that I have, which I had stuck on top of those kind of burgundy dictionaries, and this whole little vignette I think turned out super cute. I love the way that it looks. And if you see frames but you don't like the color, but you like the shape and the size and all of that, again, paint it. Paint it whatever color you want, even if that's making it white again. But for me, it was back to gold, and I love that. I've been wanting to try this hack of using ketchup to clean up brass. It didn't go quite according to plan. I'm just gonna caveat that right up front. First of all, here's what you do. You put the ketchup all over it, let it soak on it for a little bit, and then you rinse it off, and then make sure you dry it really thoroughly. Now, here's what I've learned. It works really good on solid brass. But if it's like something that's been dipped in brass and is not solid brass, it can turn it kind of a salmon-y pink. So that was kind of a bummer. So I don't know if I've like ruined some of these pieces. I mean, they're still cleaner, they still look cool, but they're definitely kind of like a more of a coppery color, which I think is what it is that it's copper that has been dipped in brass. The ketchup worked amazing on solid brass pieces like the bowl and the pitcher and all of that. Super, super fun hack for you, but just make sure that your item is solid brass before you try it. And so you may want to spot test on like the bottom. I just went all in, so that didn't work out good. But all of our little brass pieces look so much better. And what I ended up doing is taking the brass bowl and creating a tape grid on top, and then putting in some beautiful white flowers. And what I'd like to do is I just bent them, if I could, on a lot of the stems. I just bent them and tucked them into the arrangement. In these kind of bowl arrangements, you can get away with doing that because you can kind of hide them underneath. And then I just kept putting in white flowers, no rhyme or reason, but I do like with the tulips, like to do little groupings of the tulips. So not typically spreading out the tulips, but doing like I would see in nature is what I always try to think, and doing like little groups of 3 in there. And then I put in some greenery and had this lovely little white arrangement for my entry table, which I actually think is sweet, and it really matches my decor. And I love the little hit of brass on the bowl. I think it reflects the light and it looks super, super pretty. And I found this beautiful brass rings at, I think, Ross. And so I thought I would try that out, and I'm testing it. And so what do you think of the brass ring chain? I think that that looks a little bit better than the wood beads, and I am just loving the look of this white one. I don't know if I'll put the peonies. Anyways, I love the peonies, so I don't know if I'll put those back, but let's be honest, with what I do, I am constantly changing things around. So that will probably be a never-ending project, that table. So just love the brass that you can pick up when you're thrifting. Super good. I would always check it out. A actual Pottery Barn dupe, so this should be fun. Okay, so I came across this mirror on the Pottery Barn website, and it was $450. It was very pretty, but I knew that we could do this for a lot less, and I found a round mirror that looked very similar in size, scale, and detail. Sends one tiny little thing for $15 at a thrift store. I believe it was like a Disney surplus. I live in the Orlando area, and some of the thrift stores in the area get Disney hotel surplus items or old items once they've like redecorated. So on our inspiration one, there were these half round beads on the face of the mirror. It did have like some beveling edges, just like our mirror had. The only thing it was missing was the beads. So I just ordered a bag of them, 1 1/4 inch half wood beads off of Amazon, which I'll link below if you're interested. And it was like a $10 bag. So we're now into this $25. And I took this bag and glued on each bead and spaced them out a little, because sometimes if you do like half round beads and you end up with like a partial bead, it looks a little bit weird. So I thought if we added a little spacing like our inspiration one, you would want to give it a little bit of wiggle room at the end so you don't end up with like a partial bead. And if you have a little bit of wiggle room, it helps you at the end. So if you have to fudge it a little bit, it is okay. So all I did is took some Gorilla hot glue and just kept gluing them around the entirety of our circle, and it worked out perfectly. Now, Gorilla hot glue is really good. I don't know that I would do this if it's going to be in a very hot environment, but this glue is very strong if it's going to be inside your home. So if you were doing it in a climate that was going to be warm a lot, I would probably use the E6000, but I think for our intents and purposes, this will work out just fine. So this didn't take me very long at all. And then if you noticed on the inspiration, it had kind of like a dark brown undertone. I made sure to tape off the interior of our mirror, cover it up. I tore like little tiny pieces because it's around, and I went around the circumference of the circle. Then I went back in with a razor blade and cut in that seam and then peeled back the excess so that we had like a nice smooth surface there. And then I just covered up the center with some paper and some other tape, and it worked out great. And then we spray painted it brown. And when I saw it brown, I'm like, this looks actually really good, this dark brown color. Maybe I should consider doing either another one or something in a darker color, because I think that this looked actually pretty cool. It kind of had like a nailhead trim vibe to it. But then we did proceed to paint it white and let that fully dry. And once it was fully dry, I went back in and distressed it by hand. I didn't want to do anything too aggressive. In fact, I don't think that I sanded mine quite as heavily as the Pottery Barn version. I thought that maybe they might have gone a little overboard on the sanding personally. And in the end, our version looks almost identical, but the difference is when you add up the beads and the paint and the extra supplies, we're into our mirror about $30. So that's like 5% of the original cost, which was $450. And nobody's gonna know the difference. Nobody's gonna be like, oh, is that Pottery Barn or is that a dupe? But you and I will know because we were the ones who did it, and we saved it together. And so I love how this looks. I think it looks really cool. However, I hung it here in my entryway just because that was a really good spot to try it out in. Personally, I think I may go back in and re-spray it into a darker color. I think it would look really nice in that darker color, but I don't know. It looks good this way too. And either way, we got a look of a Pottery Barn one for a tiny fraction of the cost, and I always love that so much. I love it. And I hope you did too. Now it's time to get to work making our very easy thrift flips, which was these incredible amazing, authentic Pottery Barn pots. In fact, it is something that I kind of tried to emulate in one of my previous thrift flips, so it's kind of, I don't know, serendipitous that I actually found the genuine thing at a thrift store. There were 3 pieces marked at $6.99 a piece. The thrift store owner marked it down to be all 3 items for $20. It's incredible because these items on Pottery Barn website range from $40 to almost $200. So this is just an incredible buy. The best part is they really didn't need anything done to them because they were in perfect condition. So what I did is on one of them, I decided to do a very large, beautiful floral arrangement. So what I did is I created a tape grid just so I wouldn't have to use floral foam and as many flowers. In the end, it still took a lot of flowers because it was quite a large bowl to begin with, and that was okay. So the way I kind of try to approach it is little groupings here and there. I like to imagine how it is in nature and then do some varying heights. I don't want it all to be an even mound, but some tucked in a little bit more, some poking out a little bit more, a couple of flowers here together, and it doesn't have to be all uniform. That's just the way I approach it, and a lot of people have different approaches. I decided to go with kind of an all white and green theme, and I in the end really love how this ginormous arrangement turned out. It's very pretty and I love it. And in the mid-sized one, I threw in some tulips in that one, and I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do with the little bud vase. I might just set it by itself as is. But that's what's cool about thrifting, is sometimes if you go frequently, you can find real high-end decor pieces, and it's a lot of fun. I really hope you enjoyed that easy thrift flip. I found this binder and I had an idea of something that we could do with it, and I wanted to try out a new technique that I hadn't done before on Cricut, and that was debossing. I'm also going to just let you in, it didn't go according to plan, but I did say that this was one of my favorite thrift flips, and it is. So let's go through the process. And I was out of the brown leather, but I did have black, and I thought the black would work out just fine. So what I did is I cut it down again to size, and then I line up on my binder and trace out where the little silver grommets are on the spine, and I decided to cut those out so you could see that in the spine. And I took my crocodile and clipped those out so the little silver grommets you could see and there wasn't a weird bump. And then I sprayed on some spray glue pretty heavily, I would say pretty good. And then you want to let it sit for about 3 to 5 minutes according to the instructions to get really tacky before you place it on. If you put it on right when it's wet, it's not sticky quite yet. So you wait 3 to 5 minutes. Then I lay out my binder and start to smooth it on, and I can tell that it's gripping really good. So I'm really pleased with this at this point. And then to attach it to the inside of the binder, I just took some Gorilla Hot Glue. Gorilla Hot Glue is really strong hold, and I know that it will do the trick, and I just glue around those edges. I snip off the corner so that it will fold a little nicer, and in the end, I'm really happy with the result. It's nice and smooth. And then I fold it and make sure everything is smooth and there's no puckering. And if you need to tug on it a little bit, you want it nice and tight. Then I sent my images back to the Cricut Maker, and I cut them out in that gold foil vinyl, and it came out easy. I was able to weed it, get it looking all great, put some transfer tape on it, and then I centered up the image on the front and really pressed that right down into it. And then I did the same. I ended up going with a longer Callahan. There was the littler one that was kind of stacked on each other, but then I ultimately went with the longer Callahan cookbook on the spine. And look at this cookbook. Does it not look so super high end? And it started out as this kind of dated paper binder. It was cute, but we made it look so much better with a little Dollar Tree vinyl and some permanent vinyl and a little help from Cricut. And we probably have $6 to $7 into this cookbook, and it would make a really amazing gift, don't you think? It looks amazing. I love how this turned out, and I hope it sparks some ideas. For our next really easy DIY thrift flip, I had this crate that I picked up on several shopping trips ago, and it cost me 99 cents. It was such a good deal, but it was, you know, it'd been well loved. There was a little bit of paint overspray. I guess that it was probably in somebody's shop, and it got a little paint overspray on it. So what I decided to do is kind of sand it down and distress it a little bit more to take off that paint overspray. Other than that, that's all I really did. So what we're gonna do with this crate is we're gonna turn it into a little toy crate for my little DIY dolly. The DIY dolly that you see wandering around here in these episodes, I thought she could use a little toy crate. So we needed to make a little sign. So I had this little wood sign that I picked up from the Dollar Tree back when it was still $1, and I decided to paint that out in a white chalk paint. So I did really good coverage and then left that to dry. Now the thing about chalk paint is I do notice that it does end up leaving some ridges, but if you do a little sanding on it, it really smooths it out into a fantastic, very smooth finish. And I really do like using chalk paint, especially in conjunction with like vinyl projects. And so that's what I did, is I sanded it down and like scuffed up the edges, since we were already having kind of a rustic crate. So with that prepared, now we're gonna dress it up with a little bit of vinyl. And what I thought about is I really thought it would be cute to put a little picture of Dolly in vinyl. Well, I was looking at all of the cockapoo pictures and they didn't really look too much like Dolly. And so then I found one on Etsy that was actually a cavapoo, and it really did resemble Dolly like a lot. And so I decided to purchase that, and I'll link the one that I purchased below if you're interested, and centered that up top. And then I added Dolly's things in a playful font, and then I decided to cut that out on my Cricut Maker using their smart vinyl, which you don't need a mat for, which is so awesome. And then I just cut it out, and it went super fast. It's lickety split, and then I weeded it and then added transfer tape. Then I took off the backing of it and then added it to our sign. In the city light. And then I just took some of my Gorilla Hot Glue, which is really strong, and glued that onto the front of the crate. And that was it for this project. And I tossed all of Dolly's toys in it. And as you can see here, she likes it. She approves. And I think it's cute, and it's gonna be really functional to put all of her little toys. She's spoiled. She has a lot of toys. And so it's good to have one little place for them all, even though I know she's gonna drag them all over the house like she always does. So I hope you enjoyed that easy project. Next up, I found this wooden box, and I'm not really quite sure what it was, but my first thought was this would be a really good pen holder. So I don't know if it was originally supposed to be a pen holder or not. I decided to convert it into one, and very easily so. So I just went into Cricut Design Studio and created a little stencil with a G on it for my husband, because I thought he would really like it and needed a little pen organizer that looked a little nicer than a cup. So I cut that out on my Cricut Maker, and then all I did was weed it. And this time I decided to try to not use transfer tape, just because I felt like I could do it just like a sticker, because there was no like odd little bits and pieces. I probably would have just used the transfer tape after giving this a whirl. It was a little tricky. I did get it on there, but transfer tape would have made it a little faster and a little easier, but it did work out. And then I took some antique gold rub and buff and just very lightly rubbed that on and did 2 coats. And what I like about rub and buff is it's a really pretty sheen. It dries really quickly, and so that's really nice, and then it has a pretty good strong finish. And then I felt like it could use a little bit extra, and so what I decided to do is create a little washi tape edge, and then I took a little rub and buff to the outer rim of that to kind of tie it all together. And it literally took less than 5 or 10 minutes, like total time, even drying because of the rub and buff. And I think this is such a cute little pin holder that I hope my husband will like. I haven't actually showed it to him yet, so he'll be getting it soon. All you need to do is, when you go thrifting, find these little wooden pieces that are just kind of boring and customize them, and they make great gift ideas. So just keep your mind open for things that you can customize at the thrift store and give new life and create a wonderful gift idea. I hope you love this project. So our next thrift flip knockoff comes from West Elm, and it's this beautiful kind of gold tray. Now the inspiration one, I think it was actually made out of wood, but it kind of had like this metallic finish that made it look kind of like a brass tray. And it sells for about $44 at West Elm, and I thought, we could do this for a whole lot less. And so I found this gold tray that it was kind of a plastic gold tray, but it was already gold, and it was about the right size, the right shape. It had the handles. It looked really, really close to the inspiration one. The finish was not in fantastic shape, but that was no matter because we were going to take it home and use some rub and buff on it. And that's what I did, is I took 3 different colors of rub and buff. I believe I used antique gold, Grecian gold, and European gold, and I kind of layered them on one at a time. So I take one color, put that on, take the next, layer that on, and then the next, and layer that on. And then if it was heavy in one spot, I would go back with the one color and kind of just give it this really cool kind of sponged on patina. And I use these little sea sponges for that. I went all the way around, and by the time you were done, you would never guess that this was plastic. It looks so beautiful. In fact, if I might be so bold, I like personally this tray better than the inspiration one. I like the patina of it better. I think it looks a little bit nicer. The sponging effect that they did on the West Elm one is all very consistent, and if you like that, that's great, but I kind of like the variation of my tray versus theirs. But again, it's a very similar look. My end cost, by the time you include the $3 tray that I got at the thrift store and a little bit of rub and buff, which goes a long way, I'm all in at about $4.50 versus the $44 of the original one, not including taxes or anything like that. And I'm about 10% of the cost, and I love those savings. I think it's a really good knockoff. This one I actually didn't get at a thrift store. This is a silverware box that belonged to my great grandma Ruth, who I've talked about on this channel before. She was extremely meaningful to me and impactful to me in my life, and she's been gone for several years now, and I miss her. But I ended up with this silverware box, and it's a little worse for wear. And I was like, what can I do to this? The inside was just really beat up, but the outside was also beat up. So I wasn't going to use it for silverware. So what I decided to do, and I know my grandma Hershey would be okay with this, is we are going to turn this into a special keepsake box slash jewelry box, and we are going to monogram it. But the first thing we did is I ripped out all of the blue velvet. It was really tattered, but it was really easy to pull out too. So I pulled out all of that, and the outside of the box and the inside of the box were just kind of beat up. So I took it outside and gave the inside and the outside a really good sanding. I could have done a better job. If I'm being honest, I could have spent a little bit more time sanding it, but it was fine. So after that, I kind of like experimented with a couple of different finishes on the inside of the box. I wasn't really loving anything, so I just decided to just let it be for a minute and go ahead and work on the outside. And I knew I wanted to do a wood monogram. So what I did is I designed a monogram on my Cricut design space, and then I went ahead and cut it out on my Cricut maker in like a thin balsa wood. Super awesome. Now here's where I kind of went wrong. So I decided to just make it go a little bit faster. I was just going to hot glue the monogram into place. That was a mistake. If you were to do this, just go ahead and use wood glue and glue it to the box. It will be a lot like more flush. I mean, because what ended up happening is the glue kind of lifted it up or raised it, which created like some problems down the road. So just use some wood glue, put something heavy on it, let it dry for several hours, and then move on to the next step. Learn from my mistake. And then I kind of left it overnight, and I'm like, what am I gonna do about the inside? And then it came to me in a dream, or I recalled something that I had. So I came up with a really good idea, but you're gonna have to wait just a second more. But because the first thing we needed to do is I drilled a hole for the handle that I'm gonna add, you'll see. I took the box outside and we spray painted the whole thing white inside and out. Now you'll see like the top that I kind of chalk painted the top at first. I should have just spray painted it. It was just such a much more consistent, smooth look. Anyways, spray painting was the way to go. I did 2 really good coats and then like a light 3rd coat. Once that was all dried, I pulled out some stickers that I got at the Dollar Tree a few months ago. They may still have them, but they're peony stickers. Now I know I'm gonna get comments. I'm from the West, we say peony. I've said peony my whole life, but I know that there's a lot of people who have a lot of feelings about that, and they say, no, it's peonies. So with you say peonies, I say peony, and hopefully it'll all work out. Anyway, so we're gonna stick them in, there was no rhyme or reason. I just kind of stuck them here or there, just the way it looked good to me. I even split one from the lid to the bottom and cut it with a razor blade, and loved that. And then I decided to add this quote. So I cut the following quote out on my Cricut machine in a pink vinyl. And it says, when someone you love becomes a memory, those memories become a treasure. And I thought that this was a perfect quote to put in a memory slash keepsake slash jewelry box. And it's where I'm going to be storing this beautiful locket that belonged to my great-grandmother, was gifted to her by my great-grandpa, and she gifted it to me on my wedding day. And it's this beautiful locket that has a significant meaning. It's such a beautiful piece, and now it has a beautiful box that also belonged to my Grandma Hershey, so it all comes full circle. But to finish out this look, I just added this really cool mercury glass knob that kind of dangles like a piece of jewelry. On the outside, it's kind of sleek, white, with a little bit of glitz of that mercury glass. And then when you open to the inside, it's got a lot of fun and a lot of personality. And I just love this jewelry box, and I hope you like it too.
Say something that will make my day, 'cause these memories of her won't go away.
So my husband finally put his foot down and said, enough's enough. He said, I love you, honey, but something's got to happen about this wood pile. It's gotten way out of control. And honestly, he's right. After multiple projects, my wood pile was going crazy. I'm going to be trying to use up some of the scraps from my wood pile. And the first one is this TV stand. This one was a reject from my recent living room makeover. It's just laminate, not cute. But in order to make this look beautiful, we got to take it outside. So how many of you have something in your house that looks a little like this? It's a very inexpensive TV stand. It's made out of laminate. You can find them in thrift stores everywhere. But it just so happens to be the perfect size for an entryway bench. Everything about it is perfect except for the way it looks. It looks cheap. It doesn't look high-end. It doesn't look interesting. It is super boring. We're going to start out by sanding with an electric sander just to make this job go a little bit faster. You can sand by hand if you'd like to. We don't need to worry so much about the top because we're going to cover that up. All right, with this all sanded down, all we need to do is wipe it, get it nice and clean with an old rag, and then let it dry. So now Now it's time to cut down our scrap shiplap, and for that we need to get powerful. Now I don't want you to get nervous because it is my job to help demystify the use of power tools and show you just how usable a miter saw can be. It's not scary, I promise, and it's gonna make your life so much easier. Now, if you don't have a miter saw, that's okay. You could do this with a miter box by hand. It will just take you a little bit more time, but you'll get a nice, awesome workout with your arm. Clearly, I'm not working out. So we're gonna measure the distance that we have from the top of the seat to the bottom, and that is 17¾ inch. So we're gonna just go ahead and mark that on our board. And then we're going to cut it. Now I'm going to be using a sliding compound miter saw. Let me show you how we're going to do this. First of all, we need to protect our eyes. You can also protect your ears and your face if you like. I would never discourage anybody from protecting themselves. Just make sure that you're able to still move. These are dirty. We're just doing some simple straight cuts, and the way you turn this on is you put your thumb here, thumb pushes that in, hand pulls this up like so. And that's how you turn it on. It's super easy. So let's do this. So then we take our board, we get it lined up with the edge of our blade. So line it up before we pull the trigger, and we're gonna cut. And it's as simple as that. Now that we have our board cut, we can write PAT on that, and that's just short for pattern. And we can use this one to mark all of our boards. We need a total of 11. Instead of remeasuring every time and maybe the measurements get off, we can just use this one to cut them all with, and that's gonna make our life so much easier. And then cut away, cut, 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 cut. While we are already making cuts, I pull out 3 1x6s from my scrap pile. 3 more pieces of lumber down. Yes! I know my husband will be so thrilled. And we cut it to 59 inches, which is the length of our bench. This is going to sit nice and flush on the top, which is perfect because I have something else planned for along the edge. Now it's time to paint, and I first start by taking some spray primer and priming our bench. We don't need to worry about the top again or the back. I left the back on there primarily just to prevent some overspray. Now, this is literally the only part of the painting process that I would do again. Because in my mind, to save time, I decided to take some black chalkboard paint and spray paint the entire bench that way. Boy, was I wrong. Not only was it not a time saver, but it hurt my fingers from holding down the sprayer, and it just wasn't a very great finish, and it just took forever. But I was stubborn and I saw it through to the end. But honestly, hindsight being 2020, I should have just broken out the regular paint or chalk paint and rolled it on. It would have gone on thicker, more evenly, and been just generally faster, which is kind of crazy when you think about this is why I was doing this in the first place. So just learn from that from me to just go ahead and roll it. Now, while that was drying, I took Robin Egg blue spray paint and sprayed our shiplap. I would do this part again because it worked out just fine. I really thought the color was very pretty. It's going to add such a nice subtle pop of color to the bench. Now, while that was drying, kind of chain reaction going on here, I went ahead and took some antiquing glaze and antiqued our boards for the top part of the bench. Then we had a whole lot of stuff drying all at the same time. Once the paint was dry, I took a clear coat and sprayed that on as well. Now with our finish done, we can get rid of this. This was just kind of to help protect from a little bit of overspray, and this might be overkill, but how often do you get to use a sledgehammer? So I'm gonna knock this out. Yeah! We flipped this around and we are gonna install our shiplap. reverse. I'm gonna start from the center and move out just so that it's even on either side when we're finished. So we're gonna center this. See how perfectly that fits in there? Do one down here. And then I'm gonna be doing most of mine down from the top. We're gonna drive it from the top. These nails are too long. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run them all the way on the top, and then I'm gonna switch out the nails and do shorter ones across. So we switched out to shorter nails, and we're gonna do the bottom, and then we will measure these end pieces. Here we go. Okay, let's talk. I am running out of daylight. This has ended up taking a little longer than I thought it would, but I think in the end it's gonna turn out really amazing. I'm pretty excited. I ran into a couple of issues. There is like on one board where I shot the nails in at the wrong angle and it came through, but in my scrap pile that I am trying to dwindle down, I found some trim, it's usually white, that I spray painted the black and finished, and we are gonna simply just glue that, and it's gonna hide our little oops-a-daisy, so no one will ever know, except for all of you, of course, that I made a boo-boo. I actually had to run to the store because I didn't have the right length nail to nail this down into place. So while I was picking up nails that were just right, I decided to get some of this trim. I think it's mullion, I don't know, I think it's used for door casing. And what I thought we'd do is just finish it out a little bit more and hopefully not add more scraps to our pile. But I figured if we just nailed this into place and then add the same antiquing wax on this, that it would just look beefier and more finished. And then we'll just do some more little finishing touches, and then we'll be wrapping this project up. I'm totally obsessed with how this bench makeover looks in the end. It looks so expensive, so nice. This TV stand was totally headed for the thrift store, but with a little bit of creativity, some scraps from my wood pile, and a little bit of elbow grease, we turned this cheap looking TV stand into something that I would be proud to have in my entryway, and I love it. It's really cute, but what do you think? My next project is a shadow box. It was a simple plain shadow box. I picked it up a long time ago for $2.99, and I've had plans to do something with it for like ever. And now is the time. And what we're gonna do here is we're gonna take some more of that shiplap that we used on the bench and just kind of fill it in the back to kind of give it a little bit more texture and dimension. So I simply line up my shadow box over the top of the shiplap and trace the inside so I know where to make my cuts. I make my cuts on my miter saw. And since it's a compound sliding miter saw, that means it gives it a little bit more length that it can cut. And so I cut it on that because it was a really nice precise cut, and then I can flip it around and cut the other side, and that makes it really easy, a lot simpler than pulling out a circular saw and trying to keep it straight, clamping it down. So using my miter saw in this situation made it really quick and easy work. And then I just took my nail gun and kind of nailed it in the top and on the bottom. I didn't do it on the sides just because I didn't want to see the nail holes on the side, and I figured it was sturdy enough doing it on the top and the bottom. And then I decided it needed a little frame, and I had some leftover molding from our bench, and so I took some of that and created a simple miter frame around the front of the shadow box. And then it was time to take it back inside, where we caulked all of the seams, and that would just make it so you don't see the gaps, and it also adds a little bit more stability to the piece. And then also all of those nail holes and everything, we filled those in with some putty and we let that dry. Then we painted the whole box on the outside in a black chalk paint. Now, I actually really loved that kind of aqua color, and it kind of matched some of my other pieces, but I decided to go with the black only because of the location of where I was going to be putting it. I have two places where I think that this would work, and in both places that robin eggs blue wouldn't work, so I was kind of sad to see that go because I really did like that color. But I was really happy with the black chalk paint, and then of course we painted out the middle, just the white. And look how cute this looks all put together. It really elevated a simple box that was kind of boring, kind of bland, and now it's just been lifted up a little bit, and all because of some scrap wood that my husband is super happy is no longer outside. I just love how this turned out. We've got $3 to $4 into this and it looks amazing. I love it, but what do you think? If you're finding value in this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you smash that like button, and if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on some future episodes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's pretty hot and humid right now outside, so I want to avoid that as much as possible. But you'll notice this beautiful little piece here. This was such an awesome score. So I was driving to a store in another town, and on my way I kind of glanced to the side and I was like, what is that? And it was kind of like this architectural salvage. It looked a little bit like a junkyard, I'm not gonna lie, and I decided I really wanted to check it out. And I ended up getting 4 pieces that we're going to be doing on this episode from that location. It was a hidden treasure, so I was really excited. Well, I saw this upside down in a pile of chairs and stuff, like really high, but I could tell that it was really something special, so I wanted it. I didn't even realize this until I got it home, but I looked underneath and it's an Ethan Allen. I knew it had really good taste. So after removing the seat, we take some Briar Smoke gel stain, which I will link in the description box, and give the whole piece a good coat. One of the reasons I like this gel stain is because it's more opaque, making it a lot less work, and you don't need to necessarily sand down a piece like you would if you were using a regular stain. So I'm just a huge fan of gel stain. One note I would tell you is when you're getting around the edges of the caning, you might need to go back in with a little paintbrush to kind of get into those little nooks and crannies. Now, after we stain it, we're going to let it dry for a solid 24 hours. Then I really wanted to kind of give it that whitewashed effect that you've kind of seen on similar pieces recently. So I came back in and I mixed some clear wax with white chalk paint. In this case, I used the color called Plaster, which is slightly creamier in color. You don't need this much. I kind of overmixed, but I just wasn't sure. And you kind of mix in a 1-to-1 ratio. And then we just brush it on and then wipe it off until you're happy with the look. I left it a little thicker in those kind of carved out areas because I really felt like it made them stand out and you could see the design a little bit better. But just apply it in a way that makes you happy. And then while that is drying, we are going to work on the seat cushion. The first thing we want to do is we want to remove any of the piping, which was usually a little easier to do in this. And this is why I know Ethan Allen is a well-built piece, because I had a hard time getting off the piping, but I eventually did get it off. And then we're going to wrap it and recover it in a new fabric. Now, I really love that kind of linen look that you've been seeing on similar pieces like this. And I recently came across the most amazing painter's drop cloth off of Amazon, which I will link in my description box. But I've used a lot of different painter's drop cloths, and this is by far the best value for the money because the quality is so much more thick and beautiful looking. There's less seams in it and just generally an overall higher quality feel to it. Now we are going to cut off a section and wrap the bottom seat in this fabric and just staple it into place. Now you can see how I go about this. You can see that I start from the middle and you kind of work in a north, south, east, west kind of pattern, making sure that it's pulled out nice and smooth, but not like too tight, but tight enough. You don't want to pull too hard. And then once you have a staple on each center area, then you kind of work from the center out to the edges. And then when you get to the corner, you're going to staple in the corner first, and then you're going to kind of wrap it like you would a present. Now, if there's a lot of excess fabric, you want to get rid of some of that bulk, you can take your scissors and kind of cut away some of it prior to stapling, and that way it will just help it lay flatter. I hope that's all making sense. Personally thought that this seat was just too flat. Now I could have added extra batting and foam and made it a lot more cushy, but instead I thought it would look more high-end and be more comfortable if we added an additional cushion on top. So what I did is I took our seat and I used it as a pattern and traced around the outside with a fabric marker, and because of the thickness of the marker, it kind of added an additional half-inch seam all the way around, and I doubled up the fabric and cut out 2 of these, one for like the top and one for the bottom. Then we need to add some thickness, so I also cut out a 4-inch strip, and I didn't actually really measure the length of this, but I made sure that there was plenty for an entire circumference of the cushion. And because the fabric tears so easily, I just do that, and it also helps it keep it very straight. And then I'm going to want to put on piping as well, so I also tear out 1 3/4 inch width strips for that. Now that we have everything cut, we are going to now make our cushion. Back in the day, I used to do my piping separately, but I found it's just as easy and a lot less time consuming if I just go ahead and sew the piping on at the same time as I'm sewing it into place. So you can do it in whatever order you like. This is just how I do it, and it saves me time. So I line up the edge of our piping fabric with the edge of our seat cushion, and I kind of stuff inside the piping and then wrap it around, as you see me doing here. Now we're going to leave about inch of this piping unsewn, and you'll see why in just a second. And then we're going to just start stitching this piping on all the way around, and then we're going to stop a couple of inches before we're to the end and make sure our piping cord matches up, and then we can kind of cut off the cord where that is, and then we're going to leave an excess of fabric of about 1 inch to 1.5 inches, and then we're going to kind of fold that down and kind of wrap it all together so it looks like one continuous piece of cording. Now I used to kind of just bend them out and kind of crisscross them at the end, but this looks so much more finished, and it's actually much easier to sew rather than trying to sew across double layer of crisscrossed cording. I hope that you can see what I'm doing here and that it all makes sense. Now that we have the piping on both pieces, we are going to connect them with that 4-inch center strip. Now you'll remember we didn't actually measure the length, and the reason is that I have had that backfire on me in the past, and I've accidentally cut it too short and thought it was going to be right. So I just make sure I have plenty, and then I start sewing it on to one side of the piece, and we're going to do it similar to kind of what we did with the piping, and leave a couple of inches and then start sewing a couple of inches down, and then we stitch all the way around one side until we get to the back, and we have a couple of inches on the other side as well. Then you're going to stop sewing at this point and kind of take some pins and pin where the seam should go in, and then sew that seam. Kind of open that seam out flat and then stitch that into place. and then it should be a perfect fit. For me, this is how I like to do it. Just like I said, I cut it too short in the past. I know it's kind of complicated to explain, but I hope that you can see what I'm doing here and that it all makes sense. The last part is probably the trickiest, but totally doable. The most important thing is taking the time to match up the corners so that everything aligns well. And typically I start with the outside corners first, and then I go to the middle, and then I use plenty of pins or clips in this case. And I love these clips more than the pins just because they are so easy to work with. Now this might take some adjusting, but you want to take the time to do this to make sure that everything is aligned up so that you save yourself some headache later. And then we are just going to sew around the majority of it, leaving an opening in the back so we can stuff in our cushion. And then we're going to stuff in our cushion, and in my case I just had an extra feather down pillow on hand that I thought would work perfectly because those feathers are so pliable and they can kind of fill in those little nooks and crannies. It actually worked out great. We added a lot of fluff, it's super soft, and then we're just going to pin or clip that seam closed, and then we're going to take it back to our sewing machine and use a stitch in the ditch technique, which is just kind of sewing extremely close to that seam line, almost so where you can't see and tell that it's there, but you do want to make ultra sure that you catch all of that fabric so it will stay closed. I love this technique because I didn't have a zipper handy, but you could totally add a zipper if you'd want to make it removable and wash it. But for me, I just thought it would be fine, and I typically use a steam cleaner to steam clean things like this anyways, but you do what works best for you. I absolutely adore how this chair turned out. I rescued this chair from the top of a pile of junk, literally, and I paid $35 for it, and then I probably have an additional $5 to $10 more in supplies. If you were to go into an Ethan Allen store today and buy a similar chair, you can expect that would cost you around $1,500 to $2,000. And I don't think by revamping ours we've sacrificed really anything in quality in the end. I just love this end result, but I love the price even more. But what do you think? We are going to be making I guess you could call it a coat rack, or you could hang your bags on it, whatever, or you could hang jewelry from it. It's a rack. I got these at the Habitat for Humanity Restore over a year ago, and I haven't done anything with them yet. And I've just kind of laid it out here to see how big we want to cut this piece of wood down. Mark that where we think. And then we're gonna make just a straight cut. Because I don't want this board plain, we're gonna put some trim around it. And this is just a 1x2 and from my scrap pile. We are gonna make a mark. And so the important thing here is that you want the sides to match and the long sides to match. You could do straight cuts, but I really think this will look nicer if we do miters. Now that we've got our 1x2s mitered, I'm just going to use a little wood glue and then my nail gun to attach it to our 1x6. Then we're going to give it a good sand down so that everything is nice and smooth and ready for stain. And then we are going to take that same Briar Smoke gel stain and give it a good coat. While that is drying, we're going to take those gold curtain tie backs that I found at the thrift store and spray paint them in an oil rubbed bronze spray paint. I also thought it would look really cool in a matte black spray paint as well, so you've got some options there. And then I also spray paint some screws to match. Once everything is dried, I just evenly space out our hooks and screw them into place. Once everything is all assembled, I took it back outside and did a clear top coat in a satin finish. Now, it's been a while since I bought these hooks, so I cannot remember the exact amount I paid for them, but they were pretty inexpensive. And then with some scrap wood and a little paint and a little stain, we have a beautiful piece that I can hang outfits on. There's a lot of functionality for something like this, and I hope it gets your wheels spinning for something that you could do similar. Not only is this piece very functional, but it's still beautiful. I found like this Slate charcuterie board at that same place that I found that Ethan Allen chair, and I'm telling you, it was dirty. It was straight up disgusting. But we're gonna turn it into something special. So the first thing I did was give it a good cleaning. Now the wood was very dry, so I just decided to stain it, and I used a darker gel stain this time. I used the color Kona. And when it was fully dry, I took it out and also gave it a good clear coat. Now, my mother loves charcuterie boards. She loves making these types of things, and she was coming in town for Mother's Day, so I decided to make this with her in mind. I decided to do something fun to customize the slate piece. Did you know that you can etch slate? How cool is that? So I made a custom stencil on my Cricut machine, and then I placed it onto my piece of slate. Then I used Armor Etch cream, and I generously applied it over the area we were etching, and then I let it sit for 15 minutes. Then we're going to just want to scrape off as much as you can with your foam brush, and then put the excess back into the jar, and you can reuse it on another project. Then any remaining that you weren't able to get off with your brush, you can just wipe off with a paper towel, and then take it to your sink. And you'll probably want to wear rubber gloves for this, but use some soap and water to wash off the final residue. Now, before I show you the slate piece, I decided to attach some handles to the wood part that I had picked up from Hobby Lobby to make it easier to carry. It also adds a little bit more interest too, in my opinion. Now, I was gonna screw it on with a drill, but the screws I was using were a little too tiny, and so I had to do it by hand. But it really wasn't as bad as you would think. Now, this piece had been clearly passed over many times based on how much dust was on it. But I bought it for $5, and our made-over version could easily sell for in the ballpark of around $40 or so, and it's so beautiful. Isn't this a great gift idea? So if you ever happen to come upon something like this covered in dust, just know that it might be a real diamond in the rough. I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. Our next DIY is this candlestick that I found at that same thrift store. It was beautiful. I loved it, but there was only one, and I usually like to have them in sets of 2 or 3. And so I wanted to do something a little bit different, so we are gonna do an arrangement on top. This is pretty easy to put together, and you can use your own creativity on this. I will give you a couple of pointers that I think might be helpful. I start by attaching the piece of floral foam that I picked up at the Dollar Tree, and I hot glue mine into place with some Gorilla Glue, because if I really wanted to, I can pop it off later down the road. But you feel free to use some floral tape as well if you'd like. And then I just start out with some English ivy, and I want some pieces to kind of dangle and waterfall down in kind of a soft romantic way. And then I just use a mixture of a lot of greens and whites, and you want to make sure you have varying heights and varying textures, and that's what makes it really beautiful. And you kind of want to create an arrangement in a manner that you would see it in nature, and not something that is very stiff and perfect looking. There is a time and a place for those types of arrangements, but generally speaking,
You just kind of want things to have some variation and variety in them. Now, I used a mixture of florals that I picked up from Michael's and the Dollar Tree, and this didn't take me long to assemble at all. It's just a fun, different idea of something that you can do with a random candlestick that doesn't have a mate. Or you could do this on one that does have a mate and have two. I think I spent $7 on the candlestick itself and probably around $20 or so in florals. I can see this being really beautiful at a wedding or even just for your everyday decor.
I found this jewelry box at that thrift store. It had a really cool texture to it, but it was kind of dated.
This project is probably the easiest of them all. I saw this at the thrift shop and I thought the color was like a swamp-like green and not very attractive at all, but I loved the shape and the detailing on it, and I thought that we could give it a new life by giving it a faux concrete look. We did this by painting it out in a warm gray color. Now, when I put this first coat on of gray, I thought it was a little bit too light in color, so I went back in and mixed in a darker gray with the original color. And to be honest with you, I think I could have even gone a little darker than I did, but I decided to go with this. Now, the secret to giving it that kind of faux concrete look is to very carefully dry brush on some white chalk paint. And sometimes when I was doing this, I felt like I got a little too heavy on the white chalk paint, and then I would just go back in with some of that darker gray color and just kind of keep playing around with it until I was happy with the look, and that's how you would do it as well. It's a very easy process, and it totally transformed the way this little jewelry box looks. I spent $5 on the jewelry box, and then with just a little touch of paint, it makes this piece into something so beautiful and that I would be happy to display in my bedroom or even possibly give as a gift.
I have probably for the past year or two been salivating on Pinterest over all of these beautiful French scroll farmhouse tables. They are amazing, they are beautiful, and they're very expensive. So I've just been dreaming about how I could get one of these French scroll tables forever. And then one day a few months ago, I walked into a thrift store and my jaw hit the floor because I saw this beautiful table and it was marked for $75, which is a massive savings over what I'd been seeing on Pinterest. So it needs a little bit of a makeover, a little bit of love, but the lines are beautiful. It's gorgeous. It must be pretty old. The finish is mostly worn off. The table actually extends pretty far and becomes a massive table because the leaves actually sit underneath this top piece, which is awesome, but then it tucks away and it's a normal size table. If you've ever refinished a dining room table before and had to sand, it is quite the job because if you don't sand it down to the bare wood like everywhere and you miss a spot when you go to stain it, it just looks weird. It doesn't work out right. But I wanted to try something a little bit different because I did these candlesticks a couple of months ago on an episode, and I'll link it down below if you're interested. And it was kind of like a lime wash, and it really took some ugly wood and turned it into a really cool finish. And I decided I wanted to try that on the top part of my table. This technique will allow me to not sand it down as much because we're going to be using some antiquing waxes and some paint and just kind of giving it this limed aged look that you'd see on a lot of these tables anyways. And we're going to try this technique on the tabletop. What do you think of that finish? Pretty cool, right? The good news with this technique is you don't have to be as meticulous as you would need if you were going to be staining it a different color or anything like that. You won't get that tiger striping. So we're gonna just take this outside and sand it, give it a pretty decent sanding. We don't have to be too crazy, but just sand away. And I'm gonna use an electric sander. So let's get sanded.
Before we paint, we need to do a little prep. Make sure to tape off any areas you don't need to paint. And then we are going to take plastic and cover areas that we don't want paint to get on either.
All right, so I'm getting ready to paint this, and I've decided to use a paint sprayer and some Oops paint that I lucked out on several months ago. I got some white Oops paint. That almost never happens, but I did. And I've used it on a couple of things, and I've got plenty of it here. No rhyme or reason why I'm using it over chalk paint other than I have it on hand. And it's gonna be on the bottom side. If it gets scuffed up or banged up, we're gonna be distressing it anyway, so I think it will be fine. And I'm gonna use my new paint sprayer that I got off of Amazon. It's a handy little tool. It's awesome. And the reason why I'm doing that is I think it's going to dry faster, and I'm also going to be able to get a nice smooth finish. I actually picked up a bench at Hobby Lobby that matches it really good. It has like the same lines and everything. We're going to be using it with a table, and it's already painted white, so this is perfect. To use the paint sprayer, I put a couple of tablespoons of water in here, not much, just to thin it out a little bit because the paint is rather thick. We'll go ahead and pour it into here. And then the lid, it comes separately like this, and then you just twist it on, and then once it's on, then we can connect it to the main body, so it's kind of like a three-step process. It's actually really simple to use. One of the reasons I'm doing this inside and not outside is because it's pretty humid outside right now. That kind of makes for some complications when you're painting. Over 60% humidity creates problems when you're painting, so I just decided to do this. This paint sprayer doesn't go crazy. It doesn't have a lot of overspray, but I kind of went overboard anyways with the plastic. I protected my chandelier and everything behind me, but I think that will be just fine. I put plastic over this rug even though it is on its last leg and will probably be replaced shortly. In the meantime, I didn't want it to look totally nasty, so we covered that up as well. And then we will start spraying, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. And it's gonna make the process go a lot faster. Here we go. All right, time for coat number 2, flipped over. Okay, I'm really happy with how this is looking so far. I'm gonna actually let the base dry overnight before I do any distressing, but in the meantime, it's dry enough that we can proceed with our next step. Now, this tabletop would never be sanded sufficiently if we were going to be staining it. If you want to stain the top of this, you need to get it all the way down to the bare wood. But for what we're doing, this is just fine, and it's sanded enough that we can proceed. I'm really excited to try this technique and to be able to see if it will work without having to sand everything down. I figure worst case scenario, if it doesn't work, then I sand it all the way down and stain it. I mean, it wouldn't be the end of the world. It would be a little bit extra work, but I have a sneaking suspicion that this is gonna work out just fine. We're gonna start this process. I'm taking some Folk Art antiquing wax, and I'm gonna put some in this bowl here, and then we're gonna take a cheap chip brush. Like, you don't need to spend a ton of money on this, I promise, because for what we're doing, this will be just fine. We're gonna just dab it on some paper towel and have a paper plate underneath there, and then we're gonna kind of just dry brush it onto our tabletop. And so we're gonna just do that to the entire top, and once we get it on there, we're gonna quickly then take kind of a wet washcloth and like blend it out a little bit so it's not like a harsh look, but more of kind of like a washed look. So we're gonna just keep doing this on the entire top. the time it's all said and done, we will have only used maybe a couple tablespoons of this white chalk paint on the entire top. So it really takes hardly anything to make a difference. And we're just taking it and very dryly brushing it on, and then we're gonna wipe it off with a wet washcloth and kind of just tone down the look that way. We're going with the grain of the wood, whether that goes this way. In some cases it goes this way, in some cases it goes this way. And then we're just gonna dry brush it on and then wipe it off and do the entire table. All right, now we're gonna just lightly distress the edges with some regular sandpaper. I would not recommend Dollar Tree sandpaper. It kind of shreds. Go get some real stuff. We're almost done. My last step is I'm gonna finish this top with a finishing wax for two reasons. First off, it's a little too humid outside for me to do a polyurethane or some kind of lacquer finish. And my bathroom that I usually use for these type of circumstances is not big enough for this dining table. And the second reason is because, knowing me, I like to change my dining tables, and so this finishing wax will work perfectly if for some reason I get bored and change my mind. I had one dining table that I think I changed like 7 or 8 times. But I'm really happy with this look for now, and we're just gonna get this on. Okay, so this is as simple as wax on, wax off. So we're just gonna put it on, leave it on for, I think it's like 5 minutes or so. Let me see, what does it say? 5 to 10 minutes. And then we'll come back and wipe it off. So just get a generous amount and start working it into our table. And this will just provide a protective layer for it. And then if you need to reapply this down the road, it's a pretty easy process if you feel like it needs another layer. I found some real authentic Pottery Barn dining chairs, normally $249 for $20 a piece on Facebook Marketplace. I got $1,000 worth of Pottery Barn chairs for $80. Now the chair itself is very sturdy, in good condition. The wood finish on it is not terrible. I mean, it does have some nicks and dings. I could go about just kind of restoring the wood finish that's on there. However, with what I've got going on with kitchen cabinets and my fireplace mantle and the finish on this, I just felt like there were too many different woods. Plus, I have some bar stools right next to this dining table that kind of have a black wash finish on them. And so that's what I'm gonna be doing today. These chairs have been discontinued on the Pottery Barn website. It almost looks like they just lined it and then they didn't actually upholster it. The fabric that they used was like a cream color. It was very thin, and so there's a lot of worn down spots on these chairs, and it just didn't hold up very well. And I think that that's why they were discontinued, just because of their fabric selection. you to know before we start out is this is a very forgiving technique, so it's really hard to mess up. I've got a jar of black chalk paint here that I've mixed with about 3/4 chalk paint and 1/4 water. And then you're gonna wanna dampen your brush beforehand, not sopping wet, just get it a little wet and then squeeze as much water out of it as possible. This will help kind of the chalk paint from drying on as you do this process. We're gonna dip our paintbrush in it and then wipe off quite a lot of it, and so there's not a lot on here, and we're gonna just start going to town, and we're gonna just kind of feather it on. If there's like an imperfect area, you might want to hit that with a little bit more paint and a little bit heavier, and then you can just keep working on it as you go. And we have a damp rag with us, and you'll see why we need that in a second. Kind of get in this keyhole area. And then I feel like I got it a little heavier than I want here, so we can just kind of dab some of it off here and then kind of feather it out, kind of in a crisscross, because you don't want harsh lines, but you do kind of want it to look like natural wear and tear, then that looks really good. So some of the wood is showing through there. And then just in areas that you want to rework, just dab it with a wet cloth and kind of feather it out. Like I said, this is really a forgiving process, and a little paint goes a long way. So we're just gonna kind of go at this for a while. In some of those areas where we know that there's gonna be natural tear, just kind of wipe it off while it's wet. And then you can always come back in even after it's dry and kind of wipe or add as needed. So we want some of the wood to show, but I'm looking for more of an opaque look than a stained look, so just strategic showing. If you're a sloppy painter, this is the technique for you. If there's any like dings or dents or scratches, this is a good way to hide those. It's a wonderful technique. I love this. And as you can see, I haven't re-dipped this in a while, and we've been able to get quite a bit of coverage out of just the one dip. Now I'm getting ready to needing to dip it again, but as you can see, we're gonna not need very much paint to get the job done. Get all the little nooks and crannies, and then have some areas that are like natural wear and tear. Okay, we're gonna re-dip here, and then we're gonna wipe a lot of it off. You can be super messy with this. And this will be kind of a very similar look to the existing black one that was for sale through Pottery Barn. And you can see that this is kind of drying off, and if you want to pull some of it off, you can still do it and then feather it out. So we're just kind of feathering out some of these brush strokes. This is honestly probably one of the most forgiving techniques I've ever worked with, so I'm really liking this. It's beautiful. Beautiful rich black color. If you've got too much paint on your brush, you kind of just spread the love all over, and then you can come and feather it out when your brush is a little bit drier. So just keep working on it until you're happy with the way it looks, and then you're gonna let it dry for about 1 to 2 hours. So I tried waxing the chairs, but the finish ended up being uneven and kind of blotchy. Some of it was shiny, some of it was still flat. So I'm just gonna go ahead and use this Watco Crystal Clear lacquer finish. It's in satin. I don't want it to be super glossy, but just a nice, beautiful finished sheen. And we're gonna just do some light coats and let it dry. And it's actually not too humid today for once.
These seat cushions actually look grosser than they really are. They've been steam cleaned, and these stains are just stubborn, but they will be good as new in no time once we are through. I had some white denim left over from some slip covers that I made for some chairs in Maine. It actually washes up very nice, so I'm hoping for a similar effect on these seat cushions. Now, I ripped them to 26 by 26 inch squares, large enough to cover each cushion. Since the chairs and the table are already kind of a French country look, we are going to keep with that look by adding some French stripes. Kind of just follow along what I'm doing here, but I'm actually creating a wide middle stripe and 2 smaller side stripes. Now for the paint. I went to the Home Depot and picked up a sample paint, which is more than plenty to paint on our stripes. The paint color's name is Fresh Artichoke, and I had it mixed in a satin finish. I paint it directly onto the denim, being careful around the edges as to not get too much leakage seeping underneath the tape. And once our green is on, I pull the tape right up. I don't even wait for it to dry. You want to be careful though. While the paint is drying, I find a French label off of graphicsfairy.com that I liked, and then I uploaded it into my Cricut design studio after removing the background. I adjusted the size and duplicated it so there was 4 of them, and then I cut it out of heat transfer vinyl. Then, of course, I remove the excess that I don't want and cut them apart. Then I just use my Easy Press for 20 seconds on the front side and 15 seconds on the back. Let it cool for a few seconds, peel it back, and voila! Beautiful. Then we are going to staple this on to each cushion. I work in a north, south, east, west pattern, working from the center out, and then I try to wrap each corner similar to how I would wrap a present. And you may want to cut off any excess that would block your way to the screw holes. Using the electric staple gun makes it so much easier and makes quick work of it.
Now, one might think I have gone and done lost my marbles for putting white canvas on my dining room chairs with 2 little boys at home. We are going to put 2 coats of the Scotchgard on, and I figure if my boys can't manage themselves, there's always a wood bench that they can sit on. And plus, recovering dining room chair seats is pretty simple, and so if push comes to shove, I will recover them. So let's put this Scotchgard on. We're gonna do it really good. I am just thrilled with how my Pottery Barn chairs turned out. They look amazing. They're classy, and they look like I got them from Pottery Barn, except for with a cuter seat, a cuter cushion, and that's not bad. You know, we'll see how these white cushions turn out. I might be a little nutty for doing it, but we'll see. Maybe they'll hold up, and if not, it's just an easy switch for me. I hope you've seen that it's not that hard to change out the fabric on your seat cushions in your dining room. It's a pretty easy switch. I went to a little extra effort to make mine customized, but you could just put on some fabric and it would be super easy to do. So for about $25 a piece, I have beautiful, authentic Pottery Barn chairs that look a lot better than when I picked them up, and I'm just thrilled. $50 off of Facebook Marketplace. It was such a score. At first glance, you look at it and you're like, it doesn't really need anything. It's gorgeous. It's a beautiful piece. But upon closer inspection, you'll notice that there's a little bit of wear and tear from kids. Some scratches, some nicks, some dings. This drawer right here, it's got some issues. So we're gonna try to, see, I can't even close it. We're gonna try to repair that. As you can see, I've already got my TV sitting on it. We're gonna be using it as a TV stand. Now, a lot of people's inclination is to paint everything, and I actually don't want to paint this. In fact, my plan is to not paint it, but there is some pretty significant scratching on it that we do need need to address, and I thought that I would take the opportunity to darken it up just a touch, very strategically, because I actually really like the finish. It's got some really cool features, some white wax on it that kind of offers a lot of interest and detail. But I thought if we were really strategic, we could darken up some specific areas so that we can draw some of the darkness of my kitchen cabinets that are right over here, and some darkness of my fireplace mantle that's right over here, and kind of bring it into this. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, I don't have an exact plan for how to do this, but I think it's going to be an amazing piece. So let's get started on it. So normally I would tell you to take this outside and do this outside, but it is 39 degrees here in Florida, which is basically freezing. Well, it's pretty much close to freezing anywhere, but that's really, really cold here in Florida. So we're gonna have to do this inside. We're gonna be careful. My kids are at school. When it warms up a little bit later in the day, I will open everything up and air it out really, really good. But the first thing we're gonna do is repair that wobbly drawer. So you can see here that this is off, and that's what's going on. So we need to kind of reinstall this so that it will open and close properly. But that's a pretty easy repair. But it's got a problem here because this is cracked, and so that's loose. So we're gonna need to put a little wood glue and a clamp on that so that it can dry, so that we can properly track this drawer. So once we put on a little wood glue, I kind of spread that cracked wood open a little bit and kind of push it down with my finger, and then I take a clamp and clamp it into place. And that piece of wood that I'm putting behind it is there just to kind of distribute the pressure evenly along the cracked area, and then I let it dry. We've let this dry overnight, so we're gonna release it. Yeah, that doesn't want to come off. There we go. Almost looks like it was never even broken. So now we are going to screw this back into place. Once we screw this back into place, then we'll have a functioning drawer, hopefully. We'll just stick that screw into here. Okay, and then we need to put one in the back there. We're gonna take some sandpaper, and I've got 2 grits here. I've got 120 grit for kind of some of the deeper scratches. I'm not gonna use this very much. And then I've got 1,000 grit, which is basically like wet sandpaper. And the reason I'm gonna just use this is just to get a very fine roughness so that it will take the gel stain a little bit better. On this drawer, you can see some heavy scratching, including a smiley face. A happy little reminder of being loved by kids. But I want to remove some of these heavy scratches, so I take the 120 grit sandpaper and sand a few strategic places. Remove a sticker from the side, and then I give a good wet sand to the entire piece with 1,000 grit sandpaper. So you can kind of see that I've done a light sanding on most of the entire thing, and then like heavier sanding in certain spots that kind of needed a little bit more. Now that we've got it kind of scuffed up on the entirety, I'm gonna just take some window cleaner. I use Method Peppermint because it smells really good and it works also really good. So I'm just gonna spray this on all of it and then wipe it down with a microfiber cloth, and that will kind of grab the dust. And then if there's any areas that need a little bit finer grit, we will go over that because I can already see that there is. And then we will let it fully dry before applying some gel stain. So for this next part, I would absolutely recommend doing this outside, in a garage, whatever. I don't really have the option today. We're gonna gel stain this right here. And I have protected the floors by putting plastic down, and then I also did some brown paper over the top of that, just as like a double assurance that I don't get any of this gel stain on my floor. So I've got gloves on, and I'm gonna be using this Kona gel stain. This Kona gel stain is the same one that I've used on my fireplace mantle. So I really am hoping this darkens up the wood just a touch. Let's start right here on the top, and then always with the grain of the wood. And I think this is gonna look so pretty. And the nice thing about gel stain is it kind of acts a little bit more like a paint while still showing the wood grain. So this will be great. Let's do this. I'm gonna not even push this down into the grooves here so we can see some of that detailing still. When staining, even with gel stain, rub it on in the direction of the wood grain and it will save yourself a whole bunch of headache. Now, it was at this point when I regretted sanding down these particular areas with the heavier grit sandpaper. And I wished that I had just done a wet sand only, because the gel stain had much better coverage over the top of the existing stain than I thought it would. And it would have been just fine. And what I did ended up creating some unevenness in my stain, which ended up creating more work for me in the end. So lesson learned. If I were to do this again, I would have just wet sanded the whole thing and then used the gel stain to cover up the big scratches. So you live and you learn. Now you want to allow at least 24, possibly 48 hours for the gel stain to dry before applying your polyurethane. I ended up using the wipe-on polyurethane and I had to do 4 coats of it. Yes, 4 coats. I think I could have gotten away with 2 had I not done those sanded down spots, but in those areas it created a little rough spot and it was really obvious. But once I did the 4 coats, it eventually disguised and evened out the finish. A satin polyurethane, and this doesn't look very satin to me. Actually, it looks pretty glossy, but in the end I am really happy with the final result. I think it's just gorgeous. You could easily spend $1,000 in a store for this piece all day long, but I spent just $50 plus a little in supplies that I already had on hand, and the results are stunning. The TV stand over here is looking tired. My kids have already pulled out the game console, so real life here. But you can see that it is just beat up. How nice am I? I invite my parents to Maine, the beautiful Maine, and I put them to work. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Didn't know if I would have enough time to redo it, but after looking around, I really couldn't find anything that I liked better size-wise, scale-wise, so I decided with the help of my wonderful parent to save this piece, and it got a new coat of paint and some really fun and kind of kitschy anchor knobs from Hobby Lobby, and it really, for the cost of the coat of paint and some $2 knobs, it is probably one of my favorite saves in this entire room. I love how it turned out. So this is the little end table that my mom and I picked up at the thrift store. It was a little wobbly, so I needed to shore up the legs. What I decided to do is pull all the legs off that were loose and mix together some of this JB weld for wood, which then we just can squeeze out just as much as we need and then mix it together. And I'm going to put it on generously, but not so much that it squeezes out the sides after we press it back together. Then we're gonna let it sit like this for 30 minutes according to the instructions. And now that it's all set up and sturdy once again, I take it outside and wipe on some dark walnut Danish oil, which not only deepens the richness of the wood, but it also acts as a sealant, and then I leave that to dry.
My story, raised in a small town, trying to burn out in glory. Yeah. I never quite.
I just love the end results. I think that they are cute, but not overdone, and I'm really thrilled with it. Now I've got 2 picnic baskets. We're gonna start with this one. And so with our first one, I found this basket at a thrift store. I believe it was for $6.99. It kind of has like a suitcase feel, but it's definitely a picnic basket. And I knew we could update it and give it new life. And the first thing that I did might seem scary to some of you, but I just decided I really wanted it to be white. So I went ahead and spray painted it very well. We did it the inside, we flipped it over and did the outside, and we kind of just got it from every angle, making sure to let it thoroughly dry. The nice thing about this is you kind of can spray it on a little bit thicker than normal because there's a lot of nooks and crannies, and it kind of just sucked it right up. You don't want to go too crazy. I wanted to do something more than just spray paint it white. I wanted to give it a little character, and all of our thrift flips kind of have a little bit of a French flair, if you will. But if that's not your style, I hope you still watch, because there's a lot of good techniques and ideas that you can kind of implement your own look into. Stick with me even if French isn't your thing. But I knew I wanted to have kind of like a picture of something yummy that had a French flair. So I designed this image for you, and I will be giving you the free printable in the description box below, so look for the link for that. This image is gonna go on this oval wood round that I got from the Dollar Tree back when it was still $1 and not $1.25. It's not painful at all. I don't keep talking about the fact that they went up. Just kidding. But we needed to prep the surface for what we were gonna be doing, because there's a little bit of a twist to this printable. So the first thing I did was fill in those little holes with putty, and then I let that dry. And then of course, after that was dry, I sanded it down, prepping it for paint. We are gonna paint that out in 2 coats of white chalk paint and prep the surface for it. Then we are gonna print out our image onto what's called water slide paper. I've used water slide paper in the past, and I just absolutely love this technique. I love it over a couple of other techniques. Now that we've got our image printed out on this special water slide paper, this is the most important step for this whole process. You're gonna spray 3 coats of this triple thick crystal clear glaze by Krylon. This is the one that I recommend. You just need some kind of like acrylic based clear glaze. It dries pretty fast, especially in nice weather. And so every 15 minutes you can put on a coat, and then when it's dry, we're gonna cut out that oval shape, and then we're gonna submerge it in water. And this is where the whole water slide feature comes into play. Once we've submerged it underwater for about 30 seconds, it might, give or take, when you can start to feel it lift off of the backing, we are gonna set it right on top of our painted oval, and we're gonna line it up how we want it, and then we're gonna slowly pull out the backing from underneath. Now, the water kind of activates like a wallpaper kind of glue paste, and so that's gonna help it stick, and then you kind of just press out all of the air bubbles, and then you let it fully dry. Now, you could, because it already has the polyacrylic on it, you don't need to seal it again, but I always do, because I kind of wanted it to have more of a matted finish, and the triple thick glaze is definitely a high gloss look. And so once that is fully dry, I did 1 coat this time around of that matte sealer, and we sprayed that on. Now while that's drying, we are going to add a little bit more detail to our basket. We kind of spray painted over the brass little buttons and everything, so I just went back in with some gold leaf rub and buff and just kind of added those little gold accents back onto our basket, just to give it a little bit more personality and bring some of that character back. And then with our oval shape dry, I centered it on the front of our basket and used some E6000 to adhere our little sign to our cute picnic basket, and that's it. And it is a super cute picnic basket that you could take. I really love how this turned out. I really love that extra added element of the oval round with like the really cute French pastry on it. Again, I'll link that free printable for you in the description box below. And I hope you recreate this look, and if you do, send it to me over on Instagram. Okay, so for my next thrift flip, it's another picnic basket, and I'm just gonna be upfront with you. Unfortunately, it did not turn out quite as I had envisioned it in my head, and it's okay because I learned from it and we'll just discuss it as we go along. The first thing I did was putty, and then I let that dry, and then of course after that was dry I sanded it down, prepping it for paint. I also envisioned this painted out white, so that's what I did is I spray painted the entire exterior, interior with a spray paint, and it wasn't really soaking it up very good. This is definitely much more porous, so it was really sucking in the paint. So once that was dried, I went back over the whole thing with a white chalk paint that really gave it a lot better coverage. And because I actually initially primed it, essentially, it did go really quickly and easily, so I would recommend still spraying it because it did make the coat of chalk paint go on much better. And then I also wanted to do an image on the top of this solid wood basket because it's a little bit different shape, and I decided to just print them both out on a poster size paper, which I don't know if I would repeat this process, so I'm going to tell you what I did and then I'll tell you why I don't know that I would repeat this process. But I had it printed at Staples because it's really important to, when you're doing an image transfer technique, to have it printed on a laser printer, and I feel like they do a really high quality print job. As you can see, I ultimately decided to go to like the Farm Fresh Market one on the top of the picnic basket. So I've done a lot of image transfers in the past, and some of them have gone great and some of them have not gone super great, and I had some suggestions from people and I'd seen other ways to do the image transfer, so I decided to try a polyacrylic. Now I've done Liquitex matte gel medium pretty much every time I've done an image transfer, and honestly I think it's kind of sixes after having done both of them. They both work great or as good as the other one. So what I did is I did a coat of polyacrylic, and it's the non-yellowing kind, and I did a good coat of that, and then I took our Farm Fresh Market and set it right down on top and smoothed out all of the bubbles. Now the cool thing about using like the polyacrylic versus the Liquitex is the amount of time you have to wait. The Liquitex, you really should wait overnight, like about 12 hours. You can get away with doing less time, but really you should let it have that full time. With the polyacrylic, you can let it dry for 2 hours and get away with it. I actually, just because of timing and everything, let this dry overnight, and there was really no difference. The next step in a image transfer technique is saturating the back with water. Now, I've learned from experience that less is more. You can always add more water, and it's actually better to do it in kind of stages. Now, the paper that I had this printed out on was like the least weight as I possibly could, was still really thick. So I started peeling up layers of this, and I don't know if it was the texture of the box or what, it did not adhere the image very well at all. The saturation level on was not on there super good, and it looked pretty rustic. So you to do it little by little, just use a clean cloth and water and just very carefully peel away the image transfer paper. Now, after doing this project and seeing that there are better ways to get an image on there, I think I'm kind of through doing the image transfer. I never say never, but I just have done it enough and had such hit and miss results. I don't think that I will be doing this again. So, I mean, I did add a little bit of black rub and buff on the little buttons on the outside. I kind of sanded down the edges to kind of give it an overall look. Off camera, I kind of went back in with a little bit of rub and buff and kind of filled in the lettering a little bit. Overall, I'm not thrilled with the final result. I think it's cute, it's kind of rustic, and maybe for the right person, it would be like a really awesome look. Instead of redoing the interior, in the old basket there was like some old kind of like 1970s like vinyl liner. I decided not to redo that, and instead I had this beautiful kind of green and white checked tablecloth that I got on spring clearance last year at Hobby Lobby that's just been sitting there waiting, and I thought this would be really cute to throw this tablecloth in and have a picnic on it. My next thrift flip is a French floral serving tray. Now, if you remember, I was kind of waffling back and forth between the two images. Well, I didn't want that to go to waste, so I had this frame that I picked up on like the Hobby Lobby like clearance shelf. So it's not technically a thrift, but it was like an outcast at Hobby Lobby. And it's just beautiful wood frame that's just been sitting around waiting for the right project. Then I went and hit up my scrap pile to see what I could find. So I'm gonna just check my scrap pile here to see if there's anything. I think I have something, yeah, like this piece right here that might fit in this frame. Let's just see how this fits. Ooh, that is super close. Okay, so I just need to cut off a little tiny bit, but it's the right thickness and everything, and all we need to do is trim just a touch. Then I cut down the piece of scrap wood. I didn't have to cut off much. It was just a couple quick cuts to make it fit. And then I got to painting the scrap wood in 2 coats of white chalk paint. And then I attempted to do the image transfer on that one. Well, I actually kind of did them like at the same time, so I didn't really know that it wasn't gonna go well. But like, it's just that whole same process of the image transfer of like the polyacrylic, putting it face down, using the water to kind of, you know, remove the paper, and then it looked so bad. I was like, you know what? The picnic basket looked kind of bad. It wasn't like my favorite, but it was like passable. This to me was just a total fail. So at this point, I'm like, I am so over the image transfer. I'm good. I'm good. So then I flipped the board over and proceeded to start again, and I did 2 coats of white chalk paint. So can you guess what I'm gonna go back to? That original water slide paper. Now, the reason I didn't really do the water slide paper for that last picnic basket and initially for the tray was because the sheets only come in like an 8.5 by 11, and there would have been seams, and I just didn't know how it would work. So after the failure of the picnic basket and the epic failure of what I'm tempting to be like a little serving tray here with the French floral, I'm like, you know what? I'd rather see a little seam than have these results. So what I did is I split the image down the middle in 2, and I printed out 2 sheets of this water slide paper. It's pretty affordable too. A lot more affordable than having these images printed out at Staples, I can tell you that much for sure. So then I repeated that same process of using the triple thick crystal clear glaze, 3 coats. I think I even did 4 coats on this because it was going to be a serving tray, and I just wanted to be extra sure. With that dry, I made sure the cuts were super straight with my Cricut like little paper cutter. We just repeated that same water slide method of submerging the paper into the water, waiting about 30 seconds. Because it was a little bit bigger, it might be up to a minute. And this is where kind of like the rubber meets the road. If you did it properly, it won't disintegrate. If you don't do that crystal clear coats, then like the paper kind of disintegrates into the water, and it's just a total mess. So make sure you do that step. But we didn't have that problem this time around. We submerged our paper, laid it out where we wanted, and like carefully removed the under backing. And then we did the second piece, making sure to match up the seams as close as possible so that it was almost like non-existent, and then pulled that sheet out. And then I was like, yes, I don't even care that there's a seam. This is looking good so far. And then I smoothed it all out, got rid of the air bubbles, and let that dry really well for like an hour or 2, just to make sure that like all the water is gone and dissolved. Then I knew that I'm gonna be attempting to use this for a serving tray, so I did like 2 or 3 coats of a matte clear finish, a non-yellowing, this Watco brand that I really love, and I made sure that it was really sealed well. And also it was kind of dual purpose because I was trying to hide as much of that seam as possible. But overall, I was like doing a happy dance at this point going, woohoo, this is looking good. And so then all we needed to do was put it into that frame that we got from Hobby Lobby, and around the edges, I just took my finish nailer and nailed that down into place because we did not want it going anywhere. You don't want to be holding a serving tray and have the bottom drop out, so it needed to be secure. Now you could stop at this point and just turn it into a beautiful piece of art. As you see here, I think this could be a really good technique for art, or you could continue on like I did, and I used some of these really cool like iron handles that I love to get from Hobby Lobby in a black, and I just screwed those in on either side, and then we have this beautiful serving tray. And I have to tell you, this might be my favorite thrift flip of this episode. It's so cute and summery and fresh. You could use it indoors, you could use it outdoors. I just love it. I think it's beautiful. Now, I might have a lot of you asking, well, why don't you just Mod Podge it on? Well, I have not had great success Mod Podging things. I think ultimately over time it bubbles up. You know, I am just a huge fan of this water slide paper because it suctions right down and really has such a beautiful finished look. I love it. So I'll link that water slide paper in the description box below because it is such a cool product, don't you think? I love it better than Mod Podge. Clearly, I love it better than image transferring, which I don't know that I want to do again. Our next thrift flip, you could really do this two different ways. I found this really pretty kind of like ice bucket that was glass at the thrift store. I thought, wow, this is really, really pretty, and wouldn't that be such a fun thing to have in the summer? And then I found this really cute like silver candlestick, if you will. It's kind of like shorter, and I envisioned combining the two together. I did this kind of as an optional thing. I decided to kind of etch the front of the glass with something that's kind of summery, and so I found this image on Cricut Design Studio, and like this part is totally optional, by the way, because I think you could still get a really good look without this, but I just thought this was fun. I found an image that was like half bee and then half flowers, and I thought, well, that is very summery. And I went ahead and designed it and put it in like a round circle. I weeded out all the excess, put on our transfer tape, and then very carefully put on our stencil, which is a little challenging kind of on a round item like we were working with, but ultimately we got it pretty good. And then we applied our etching cream. I put it on super generously, and I let it sit for 15 minutes. And then after 15 minutes, you kind of scrape off all of the excess, put it back in the jar because you can totally reuse it. So you want to get as much of it off as possible, put it back in the jar for another project. And then I took like a paper towel and tried to wipe off as much of the remaining Armor Edge cream off before we took it to the sink, where we washed it off with soap and water. And make sure you wear rubber gloves anytime you're going to make contact with this Armor Edge cream because it's pretty abrasive and it can sting and hurt. And then we had this really pretty kind of fun image on our little ice bucket. And then what I did is I took this epoxy kit that I get at the Dollar Tree, and it's a two-part epoxy. You kind of open it up and like squeeze the contents of the tubes out, mix it all together like with a wooden stick, and then I like very generously put this on our little candlestick, just kind of wipe it off, and then I put it on the center of the bottom, and you want to let this sit. It's quick setting, so like it won't move in like a few minutes, but before you start handling it, I always recommend about waiting 12 hours, which is what I did. That's it. So you could do this just like the base and the ice bucket, and it would be super cute, and just forgo the stencil part. And then you just fill it up with ice and a beverage of your choice. We don't drink alcohol at our house, so you see sparkling cider here, but whatever works for you. I just think this is a really cute piece that you could use in your summer entertaining, and I love how it turned out. And what do you think? Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If so, here's another one that I think you'll like as well. And to all of my DIY goddesses out there, you are more powerful than you know. We'll see you next time. Bye.